lights on.
All the mics on?
Is it on?
No,
Yours
it
is
just came on.
Yeah, it takes a minute.
Yeah, it's on.
We're not doing it here today. No, because we just got the way it was. Nobody's had time to review it.
You never places where you never know. I mean, 40 years.
Oh, yeah.
I know how expensive that is. It's a order from my printer, and it's... Do this.
Ralph, it's on.
So we'll see.
You ready?
One step. Yeah. Quite honestly,
I
it's
asked
a big
Loretta,
Yeah.
I asked Anthony if he was gonna watch on Zoom.
It's the other one.
He said I'm a comedian.
In the,
He was?
no, he said he feels like he's
He
coming up.
said he's got like vertigo really bad.
Yeah, he
Who's
said
that?
that.
Anthony, really? Yeah. So he's not here.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's October 20th, 21 meeting of the Holmdel Township Zoning Board of Adjustment.
In accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act, NJSA 10:10, 10:4-10, I hereby announce that adequate notice of this meeting was provided in a notice dated January 6, 2021, and amended August 13th, 2021. Was sent to the Asbury Park Press, the Two River Times, and posted on the bulletin board of Town Hall, filed in the clerk's office, and posted on the township's website.
Roll call, please.
Ms. Havern? Here. Mr. Blumenthal?
Here.
Mr. Buffalino?
Here.
Ms. Campus? Here. Mr. Hearn?
Here.
Mr. Opanatopoulos?
Here.
Mr. Pesci? Ms. Kalor? And Mr. Latif.
We'll seat Ms. Kalor for the absent Mr. Pesci for all items on tonight's agenda. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance and stay standing for a moment of silence afterwards to honor police and military who've been wounded or killed in action.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Yes. Okay. This is an open public meeting. That doesn't mean we can accept public comments at any time. We follow formal rules as spelled out in the Municipal Land Use Law of New Jersey, which specifies how zoning boards function and how hearings are run. At certain times during the hearings, if it is a hearing, not on all items, when appropriate, we'll open the floor for public questions and separately for public comment. Going on to the first item on tonight's agenda, item 1.
701 Holmdel Associates, LLC, in parentheticals B&G Gulf, Holmdel/Bethany Road, Block 46, Lot 22 in the R15 zone. Preliminary final major site plan 2018-2. Applicant previously granted variance relief from the zoning board on February 26, 2019 to convert use of fuel filling station, U-Haul rental and mechanic shop to a fuel filling station and community convenience store. The new owner is reducing the impervious coverage, adding landscaping, pulling the new building addition back from Bethany Road and gas pumps, moving propane tanks further back from gas pumps, and improving the site grading. There is no change to the parking spaces.
This is an item that's up for administrative approval. It's a relatively simple item. It is a change to the site plan. The new owner found that what is happening at the corner of Bethany and Holmdel Road, the existing Gulf Station, which has previously had service bays and was also a U-Haul rental facility. They're no longer a U-Haul rental facility. There are no such vehicles there. The service bays are closed. The new owner wants to convert the building into a convenience store. That was all part of the application that started back in 2018, as was improved with the resolution in February of 2019. The new owner discovered that the footings for the new building addition were too close to one of the underground gas tanks. So they are shrinking the building footprint by 5 feet. And that is, in fact, a change to the site plan. It's considered minor. All the professionals who reviewed it. Bob, you want to comment further about this?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. As a result of them finding it close to the underground storage tanks, they pulled it back to make sure that they had adequate distance between the underground storage tank and the footings of the addition. And as a result of that, it decreased the lot coverage, and it also increased some of the landscaping, which would then screen back the propane tanks that you originally had approved. So we're getting less lot coverage, more landscaping, and a reduced building. That does not affect the parking spaces that were originally approved. So it's in my opinion that this is an improvement to the original approval, and that it can be done administratively.
What propane tanks?
The portable ones, the ones that you put in the, they lock up and they...
You didn't do away with that on the list?
No.
It was just the U-Haul that went away? But
Mhm.
the propane stayed.
Right.
Marty, you
Propane
wanna-
refills.
So the sense that this is a de minimis change, and we're being asked for administrative approval merely to indicate that we have seen it, we're okay with it. Kate, do you have anything to add?
No, I don't. I think it's all covered up.
So is there a motion to approve this administratively?
I'll make a motion to approve it administratively.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Roll call, please.
Ms. Averett?
Yes.
Mr. Buckalino?
Yes.
Ms. Campus?
Yes.
Mr. Hearn?
Yes.
Mr. Papadopoulos?
Yes.
Mr. Blumenthal?
Yes.
And Ms. Delore?
Yes.
Motion passed. We go on to item 2.
470 Red Hill Road, the Enclave at Holmdel. Dimension Center, preliminary/final site plan number 2020-6, block 49.02, lots 40, 40Q, and 41 in the R40B zone. Applicant seeks a use variance to create an assisted living residence, which will be facility for those suffering from dementia for 105 residents. The facility will consist of a state-of-the-art residential memory support program that will house a variety of innovative programs and building design concepts, including an assessment program, educational services, and extensive community outreach and support.
This is an application that we started hearing a few weeks ago, and there's been some work on this application. We have just earlier this week, 2 days ago, received revised plans. Engineer and the planner have not yet had time to review those. We also received a letter from the development director, or acting development director, questioning the use of the name Enclave, because there is an existing residential development on Middle Road that has that name, and in fact Toll or Bell Works had originally proposed to use that, and for emergency access, people don't like to have the same name on multiple locations, so that we'll leave that to you to address. So with that, Mr. Brown, do you want to continue your testimony and on this application?
Yes, I do, Mr. Blumenthal, thank you. And Mr. Gazarovski would like to introduce himself.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Ron Gazarovski. I'm an attorney with offices in Red Dead, New Jersey. I've been retained by the adjacent property owners.
Can you put on a microphone?
Pick it up? Okay. Is it on?
Yeah, make sure it's on.
Is it on now? or-
Yes, that's better.
Starting again, Ron Gazarovski, offices in Red Bank, New Jersey. I've been retained by the adjacent property owners, Country Woods Homes Association. I recently was retained by them, and the first thing I would like to do is express my gratitude to Mr. Flegger, associate, and also my adversary, not really my adversary, but my friend, for providing me with all of the information to get up to speed. I haven't read everything yet, but for their cooperation, I would not be where I am. I've just recently received this afternoon a copy of the revised engineering plans. I'll have that reviewed by one of my professionals, and I'm prepared to go forward this evening. My understanding is that I will not be cross-examining this evening, but rather we will be listening to the further testimony of my counsel's other witnesses, correct? Thank you.
Probably. That is,
Very much.
depending on how long a particular witness takes, we may permit questions of that witness at the end of that witness's testimony. But
When I
we'll see
spoke
how
to
long...
Mr. Flegger, I'm sorry. When I
Yeah.
spoke to Mr. Flegger, I said my preference was for the case to be completed, and then I would cross-examine the witnesses who gave testimony.
There certainly will be an opportunity at the end of all the testimony, which may not be tonight,
That's,
for final questioning and comment.
that's the way I would like to do it.
But
They could have
just
it.
so we're clear, this board does like to sometimes open it up after a witness, so if that
Yeah.
happens, but there will be no engineering tonight, so
Okay.
minimally, we're not going to have that.
Thank you.
Before you go, you said an association, you represent which one? What's the name of it?
A member of the association, you stepped forward and just identified.
Country Woods Homes Association.
Countrywood Homes Association, that is the association that is representative of that entire subdivision. I represent the association, which of course means that they've been authorized to retain me, and I speak on behalf of the association as well as the respective homeowners.
Fine. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Gazarovski.
Thank you, Mr.
Brown?
Blumenthal. Again, for the record, my name is Sanford Brown. I am the applicant's attorney. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for seeing us on September 22nd. We did hear testimony from the CEO, President Larry Carlson, who's still here. We also heard testimony from David Hogan. You remember he had a PowerPoint. He flew in from Pittsburgh, and he was released. So I think he's on his way to Europe right now, as a matter of fact, so he's not around. However, this evening, especially since Mr. Bucko and our engineer, who's back there, Mr. Simoff, are coordinating, and at least I hear from Mr. Simoff, he feels that any issues can be resolved, and we'll be happy to present Mr. Simoff if Mr. Bucko thinks it's proper on November 3rd. However, in lieu of that, unless you want to hear more about engineering they're working on, which I assume you don't, I'm going to start with this young fellow over here. His name is Brian Babcock, and quickly to go through the summary of the other witnesses we would hope to have before you. Jeffrey Roche is here, our landscape architect. He'll follow up on the PowerPoint that Mr. Hoagland discussed in terms of landscaping. Robert Peterson will be here for short testimony. He's the CFO of the applicant. And finally, we would hope that you would consider testimony from the lady that we mentioned last time, who is the expert on operations. And sure enough, we have Cynthia Jakes here. She's a vice president of the applicant. Unless there are particular questions, I'll proceed. So before we introduced him by swearing in, and Mr. Babcock, he's never testified before, is that right?
That's correct.
So this is a unique opportunity for us all to see how he does. Now, to go back to September 22nd, the reason why he is here is because the board asked the LSRP for our environmental engineering company to be here. So he's here to answer all your questions. I'll have him give a quick introduction because we're not really sure what would be of interest, but he'll answer any questions, obviously. Should we have him sworn in?
Yes.
Yes.
Stan? Just raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you out?
Yes, I do.
And just spell your name for the record.
Brian, B-R-I-A-N, Babcock, B-A-B-C-O-C-K.
Okay, Mr. Babcock, you're employed by Brilliant Engineering, is that correct?
Correct.
And did you author...
You move the mic so it'll pick up him a little better.
Is that better?
We're getting you loud and clear, but
No,
Brian
thanks,
wasn't
mate.
coming
All
through
right.
quite as...
Sure.
So it gets recorded for posterity.
Now, as part of the application before the board, we submitted a site investigation report. It's dated August 20, 2019. Because it was submitted in the normal course, we wouldn't necessarily have it marked separately. It is of record. But with that in mind, you signed the site investigation report, correct?
That's correct.
And you signed it as an LSRP, right?
Correct.
Would you describe to the board and the members of the public what an LSRP is?
Yes, so it stands for Licensed Site Remediation Professional. In our industry of environmental consulting, it's the professional license you pursue. To sit for the test, I believe it's 8 years experience, at least 4 years of college. And that experience has to be particular to New Jersey within this state, your work. There's about 700 or 800 of us licensed, I believe, at this point in the state. The program first came into play in 2009 with really the purpose to try to move the cleanup of contaminated sites along. The state was overwhelmed, so they decided to develop this license and this certification that allows us to proceed, for the most part, under our own authority.
Very good. And Brian, where did you go to school?
Lehigh University in Bethlehem, PA.
And you have a bachelor's degree?
And a bachelor's in science, environmental science.
And would you quickly provide us with the benefit of your professional background, which led you to work with Brilliant Engineering, and let us know what positions you have?
Past or just current?
Just go from the very beginning of your tenure after you became an LSRP or a professional engineer and lead us up to working for Brilliant.
Sure. So I graduated Lehigh University in 2005. I started for a company, Ransom Environmental, similar work that I'm in now, but as a field tech. Moved through a couple companies since then. One ECC up in North Jersey. I was there until about 2008. Then I was at Hydro Technology in Jersey City until 2014, and I've been with Brilliant Environmental Services since then. As far as professional record, I've worked on at this point hundreds of sites over the 15 to 16 years, kind of across the gamut, everything from gas stations and dry cleaners to industrial factories, for agricultural use. Pretty much anything New Jersey has to offer at this point.
And you're a director with Brilliant?
Yeah, Director of LSRP and Industrial Services.
I'd like to introduce this fellow
Any questions
as an expert.
about his credentials? You accept your credentials?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now let's get right to into your understanding of the project in question. How did you first get involved on behalf of Brilliant Engineering?
We were retained to perform the environmental due diligence on the property as part of the potential purchase. So we started with a phase 1 environmental site assessment and preliminary assessment, which basically traces the historical history of the property, reviews databases, identify any potential concerns. You also do a walk of the property, visual inspection, and then based on the findings of that report, you make recommendations for what may require further investigation and eventual remediation and cleanup.
And in fact, the report that I alluded to before, this is the net product of your findings. Is that fair to say?
Correct. That's a summation of basically all the investigation work we've done to date.
And could you just generally summarize, before I ask you a few more questions about the report, what was your basic finding?
So the findings were basically from the preliminary assessment and the phase 1, where the areas in concern were kind of what you would expect for the operation of the site, the former agricultural use, you wouldn't call it auto repair, but the equipment repair operations on the site, so things like waste oil tanks, hydraulic lifts come with that. There were gas tanks historically present. There's one mystery tank believed to probably be a heating oil from a former structure that was there back in the 70s.
What do you say mystery, by the way?
Just because we don't know exactly what it was used for. It's been out of service, the best we can tell, since, late 70s, early 80s, prior to most record keeping that would tell you that.
Was that above ground or underground?
Underground. And we identified that through a ground penetrating radar survey. We performed that of the entire property. It scans the subsurface for those kind of anomalies to make sure there aren't tanks that nobody remembers.
All right, based on your analysis and your conclusions, What's your opinion in terms of the ability of Brilliant, and you in particular as the LSRP, to oversee the necessary remediation in order for the site to be basically clean?
Yeah, so basically we've proposed what needs to be done to clean up the relatively limited issues we have identified. Really comes down to a matter of just digging out contaminated soil, removing that tank I spoke about, digging out any visibly contaminated soil around it. The material is so old that most of our samples actually came up below state standards just because it's degraded. But again, since it's visually contaminated, you can smell it, you still take it out and treat it as contaminated, so that will be carted off-site. We've been waiting because at this point we said it will be much more efficient, obviously, following demo. So once all the buildings are demoed, it will give us more access, bring in a larger machine, and we can just do everything a lot faster and more efficiently at that point.
So once a demo is completed, your company will come on site, is that correct?
Correct. We'll come out there with the appropriate equipment, and, everybody's certified, and anything we excavate will be transported to a licensed disposal facility. So it'll all be done on their manifest. Anything brought into the site will be certified clean from a quarry. To replace that contaminated soil, we're required to do that. And then at the end of the day, once everything's done, we can close it out.
And how long do you estimate it'll take from the start until you finish on the site?
The physical work on the site, going out there and excavating the contaminated soil, we're probably looking at 2 weeks maximum would be my guess. Once assuming everything's demolished and the buildings are out of our way, probably about 2 weeks on site to take care of everything, and then it's just a matter of writing reports. And
do you perceive any problem in making sure that it complies with all DEP standards for remediation?
No, we haven't had any problems. The client has agreed with us and approved with us every step of the way. No pushback, so I don't see any problems with performing the work we propose to do.
I wasn't planning to necessarily go through all the pages here, so I'll just ask if there are particular questions so that he could answer any concerns.
I believe that a cleanup like this is overseen by the NJDEP.
So, as part of the licensed site remediation program they put in 2009, is the DEP will not provide direct oversight unless a property basically falls grossly out of compliance, at which point they'll step in and take over. Those deadlines are years and years out for us. So no, I have the authority to basically direct the cleanup, choose the remediation methods. Obviously, I have to meet certain standards. There are things in guidance and technical regulations that I have to abide by, but we have flexibility as to what methods we use to clean these.
So you're the person that would then sign, so to speak, sign off and say it's clean?
Correct. The state used to issue no further action letters. Now, a response action outcome, an RAO letter comes from an LSRP like myself.
In fact, you are sort of a representative of the state based on your certification as the LSRP?
Yes, there's a laundry list of ethical obligations with that, and it basically is to abide by those guidance documents and technical regulations as I proceed.
Good. Thank you. Jerry, did you have any questions?
No, I think that answered the question from the information that we had originally gotten. That I saw the reference to LSRP, so I knew something was up there. And I just needed to know a little bit more just to make sure we're not missing anything.
Should we let Brian go home to his...
Okay, does anyone else have any...
I have a question. It may be a basic question, but how do you check for contaminants in the soil? Do you take sampling? Do you take random sampling from different areas? And just what's the method you use? And then do you again check it before construction and after construction? If you just define what you do.
So correct. When we collect a sample, it's a physical sample. So we go out with either what's called a geoprobe. It's kind of like a drill rig, and it will take a core of the soil. We'll inspect it with different instruments we have available in the field, as well as visual observation, odors, does it smell? So you'll collect your sample from the area that appears to be the most contaminated. You send that off to a certified lab. There's a handful of those in the state. They run the analysis, and you get a direct result for the individual contaminants, which we then compare to the state standards. If you're above that, you have to clean it up. If you're below it, you're good to go. As far as post-cleanup sampling, two options. Either you can collect your extra samples in advance, identify your clean zones, and then go out and clean up to that, or you can do it in the field. For things like petroleum, we'll usually rely on our field observations, so we'll say we think we're good here, we'll collect our samples, send it to the lab to confirm that. If not, we dig a little further.
So did you find a lot of deviations, or how many deviations did you find so far?
So we have the tank I mentioned before, which was, relatively unknown. There's hydraulic lifts in the old repair shop that because of the thickness of the concrete we couldn't sample, so we're going to investigate them when they demo the buildings. We'll investigate those areas at the time. There was another area behind the one building I know that had some staining, so that was obvious, so we sampled that. That was basically just a leaking line. So yeah, and also to piggyback what you mentioned before, sometimes it's random sampling. If you know the site has a certain history, but you can't pinpoint where those problems might be, then you'll grid sample. You'll establish a grid and you'll collect your samples throughout the property in an attempt to find that.
Does it matter what the property will be used for, the extent of your testing, or not?
Not the extent of the testing, but the standards you have to comply with. Non-residential standards for
Right.
soil are higher than residential.
Got it.
Residential schools and child cares have more strict standards than non-residential.
Okay.
And just by way of representation, historically, this report, which is dated 2019, as Mr. Babcock indicated, was pre-acquisition. And I can tell you that the Methodist communities relied on this report. It's the only report that we received. So we had great confidence to actually purchase the property with the anticipation that it certainly has to be cleaned up based on DEP standards before there's any new construction.
Understand.
Yeah. As the property was previously used for agricultural uses, did you look at all for arsenic?
We did arsenic and pesticides as well, things like the eldraine, chlordanes. Relatively limited, considering it was an agricultural property. There's a certain hotspot that we've identified that, basically the remediation method there is caps. So you use a mixture of either the buildings themselves or, topsoil and grass. And what the state will do is they'll have us go out every so often and inspect the property long-term to make sure those caps are in place. So if we say we've capped this contaminated air at the parking lot, I'll have to go out every 2 years and confirm to the state that that is still a parking lot, as an example, and it hasn't been turned into a playground or something like that.
Right. Good, thank you. Any other question? No? Well, since he's not going to be coming back probably,
That's correct.
yeah, then most likely that'd be appropriate. Okay, any other board members have any other questions of this witness? Okay, if there are none, then do any members of the public have any questions on the testimony that's just been given by this witness?
As I earlier stated,
Identify yourself for the record, please.
for the record, Ron Gazarovski, I have not seen a copy of this report, and I would like to hold off my cross-examination until a later point in time.
Loretta, has he been provided that report yet? Okay, I'll be between you, you can get to him. Okay,
Okay? Thank you.
two.
Yep, yep.
Any,
I'll get it to you. So I have it right here.
Thank you.
I can photocopy.
does any other member of the public have any questions about this witness? Seeing none, I'll close the public portion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your time, everybody.
Mr. Chairman,
Bob?
can I get a copy of that report? Because I don't
Oh, so
recall
that's
seeing
it.
that. So if we could get a copy of that
This is
report?
it.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, obviously the,
Yeah.
Yeah, I got it from Loretta.
it was referred to at the September meeting.
Yes.
Yeah, so.
Actually, I saw
It's
notes to it.
dated
I did
December
not see the whole
14,
report,
2020.
But
Oh, that environment. Okay, by class. Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay, that's all right.
No.
Wait a minute, is this
Sorry.
the
Yeah,
same?
go ahead.
Is this the same or
Oh,
different?
no, that's a different one.
That's right.
But I know Mr. Buffalino had looked at it. It's obviously been provided.
I hadn't seen the report. I saw a review summary of notes to it that I spotted,
Okay.
but I did not see the original report.
Okay, so this isn't
Send
it?
that over? That's
No, that's
one
not, this is
investigation
a
report?
different, this is the phase one,
Right.
this is
Okay.
the EIS.
Okay, so
Yeah, this is a different report.
get it to Loretta, and then make Loretta can get copies to everybody.
And I can provide copies if you'd rather. Okay.
Right. So if you can make copies of that?
Yeah, we should,
We should mark that then.
All right, we'll mark that. Well, I had A4 marked already, but why don't we make that A4? We'll go in order. I'll just remark, you can mark.
That's why,
All right, well,
I see what it
it
is.
should have been provided if there were comments in the engineering report.
Somebody has seen it sometime.
Yeah, of course, it was submitted in the normal course, but we're more than happy to
Understand.
submit as many copies as you want.
let's be safe.
All right, so I'm ready to proceed with the next witness.
Okay?
All right, very
Go
good. I will have Mr. Roche arrive.
I never did either.
All right. Oh, yes. So Ron, when you're done with that,
Going around.
all right. All right, Mr. Roche is ready to be sworn in.
Go ahead.
Stand and raise your right hand. You swear to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God? Again, state your full name for the record, please.
Jeffrey Rett,
And hey, just spell your last name.
R-O-E-S-E-H.
Okay.
And to hold it up the whole time.
No. Okay. Okay, as I indicated in September, I usually am pretty familiar in terms of using terms, so if I can use Jeff, or if you'd rather, I can use his formal name, but Jeff, you're used to that as a first name, correct?
Yes.
So we'll continue with that. All right, so as we did with Brian, we'd like to know a bit about your professional background and then how you were involved. And for the record, we're putting up on the screen a summary of his credentials. All right, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I'm an architect and a landscape architect. I'm also LEED accredited, as you see on the screen. I'm the founding principal of RGR. I'm sorry. I'm the founding principal of RGR Landscape, which I started in actually 1985. And in 2002, we became an affiliate of Perkins Eastman. So we're a separate company, but we're an affiliate of Perkins Eastman, who are the architects for this project. I have well over 30 years of professional experience, and I'm licensed in both architecture and landscape architecture in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, and that's my New Jersey landscape license. Since we've been with Perkins Eastman for almost 20 years, we got involved early on in a lot of their project types. So we have worked on senior housing and healthcare projects for more than 15 years. Over that time, I've appeared before many planning boards and other approving agencies in all of these states. And the most recent in New Jersey was in Holmdel Township, where we did a project for the Sisters for Christian Charity, which was actually a senior living and skilled nursing facility also.
And you also had involvement up in North Jersey, in the Jersey City area, with one of the parks up there?
Yes, many years ago, early on, I worked on Liberty State Park. We did a master plan for Liberty State Park, and we did a couple of projects there. One that was called Millennium Park, which was one of the first ones to be, one of the areas of the park to be developed, and then another one adjacent to that several years later.
And you've also had experience in New York City, with some sites that I think people would be familiar with?
Well, I guess the best known is probably the National Tennis Center. Over the last, since 2006, I guess, we worked on the implementation of the complete renovation of the National Tennis Center in Queens. But we've done many parks. We worked on Hudson River Park, Foley Square. We did the reconstruction of Foley Square many years ago. Riverside Park, we've worked there. And we've done a lot of work in other parts of the region as well.
And you mentioned your involvement with Perkins and Eastman. That includes Dave Hoagland.
Yes.
As you're aware, Dave Hoagland testified here last time. How long have you been working with Dave?
Well, for the almost 19 years that we've been an affiliate.
And
So,
during that time, have you worked on a lot of senior citizens centers?
yeah, probably a dozen or so. Different kinds, senior living, skilled nursing facilities. These are actually on the side, you see images. One is a rendering in the upper right of the project we did in Mendham, and on the lower right is a healing garden we did for Peconic Landing out at the end of Long Island.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to offer this witness as an expert in landscape architecture, general architecture.
Do any board members have any questions about his credentials? No, I'm not seeing none. The board accepts his credentials as a landscape architect. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, members of the public, just like with Dave Hoagland, our witness has prepared a PowerPoint with the plan to expeditiously go through this. Sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words. We'll see if it's true here. And so if you could proceed and talk about the project.
Okay. Well, I'd like to just start by talking about how we approached this project. You all know the site. It's a beautiful sort of open pasture, open meadow type of site. And so our goal from the beginning was to try to preserve the character of the site as much as we could. So this diagram here is just our landscape concept diagram. And there is an area, if you can see area A, which is a darker sort of yellow-brown color. That's an area of existing pasture that we think we can preserve, that really won't be disturbed during the construction. The lighter yellow that surrounds the new building complex is an area where there will be detention areas and grading will happen so that that area will be disturbed during construction. So what we're proposing to do is to reseed that whole area as open meadow. So everything you see A and B here is area that we would like to keep as open, whether it's actual pasture land or just open meadow. That's the way we envision that. So that's A and B. So another part of the site, if you look in the upper left, which is the northwest corner, I guess, where we have C, that's an area that is all wooded up there. That area will not be disturbed either. And so we're proposing just to simply keep that all as woodland. And then if you look at the lower left, you see another C down there. That's an area around the sort of the house that's there that has a lot of mature trees. There are a number of trees down there. We're actually in that sort of L-shaped green color. We're preserving 14 trees, and there's actually one up a little bit further. It's a big black walnut tree that we're also going to preserve. So these areas C, upper left and lower left, are areas of existing relatively mature trees that we are planning to keep. And then area D, which we're showing in 4 different places, this is where we're proposing to put new trees. So D1 on the northern edge, if you can see this cursor here, but you see D1, that's where we're proposing to plant a lot of new trees. And in effect, I mean, it's a buffer, certainly a visual buffer next to the adjacent community. But what we're trying to do is replicate essentially what area C is in the upper left. That's an existing woodland. That's what we're trying to create here to form a buffer along the northern edge. D2 is down where the new entry drive will be in the whole parking lot area. That area too will have quite a few new trees in the medians and along the edge and along the entry drive and in front of the building. Sort of a third component is, if you can see along the edge, even though this whole area here around the perimeter we want to keep as pasture land or open meadow, we're proposing just clumps of trees periodically. I have another plan to be able to see them a little better. Just around the perimeter, and all that is to help to soften the architecture and break up the massing a little bit. So when it's viewed from the road, you see buildings, but you also see sort of a filter of new mature trees. And then D4 is the whole interior of the enclave. And that will have quite a few mature trees that'll be in there for shading, lining walkways, and I'll show you that a little bit more. So those are the four basic components of the landscape concept. And here's a more detailed plan. So this is an illustrative version of our landscape plan that was submitted, I guess several months ago and then revised a few days ago. But you see the same components. I'm just going to go down sort of these notes along the left-hand side. Like I said, the whole northern edge, whether it's wooded or these trees here, which are really, I'm not sure whether they're actually on the property, but all of those will be preserved as they will up here in the upper right. And the pasture land. That whole perimeter along the northern edge and along Red Hill Road, we're proposing to just keep intact and preserve it as it is. In the northern buffer, so you can see here, we've colored in, we showed circles on the planting plan that showed approximately what the trees would be like when they're planted, and then I think it's supposed to be 2/3 maturity. So these circles represent those circles on our planting plan. So we're proposing to put 71 new trees in here. We don't want to put in just an evergreen hedge of some sort, which would be completely unnatural. We're trying to do something that's in keeping with the natural character of the site. So this buffer will have, I think, 9 different species. 5 species of shade trees, a couple of understory trees, and 2 evergreen trees. So these will be planted in sort of randomly, but they're not really random, but they're in several layers. They'll all be about 25 to 30 feet apart. But the goal here is to create something that is going to look like when it's planted and then evolve as a natural woodland. So it's not just some artificial barrier that's there. Hopefully it'll become a part of these darker green areas you see up here. That'll all be one sort of characteristic woodland. The next note is about the residential areas. I'm going to show you a little bit more about that. But the whole interior, again, we're going to plant quite a few trees. I think it says here 67 trees. And you see there's shade trees along the edges and in the various courtyards. But that will be supplemented also with shrubs and perennials and grasses and lots of other things. The entry drive and parking, that area, not so many along the entry drive, but in the whole parking area, there are going to be, on our planting plan, 49 new native shade trees there. And then, if you can see perhaps a little better, these clusters of trees that I described earlier along the perimeter, you can see here. And they're just, again, in informal groupings, but the whole idea is that when you look at this, you just don't see buildings, newly constructed buildings, but you see buildings with sort of a filter of these sort of hopefully natural clumps of shade trees along the perimeter. As I said, we're going to restore the perimeter here that is disturbed during construction with meadow grasses. And then, as I was also saying, we're preserving in this lower corner here 15 of the existing trees. And that's where of the ones we surveyed, there were like 46 trees in this area, not so many, some around the buildings. Down here is where the nicest trees were, the big, nice existing trees, maples and black walnuts and some others. So we're preserving most of those. And this is just a closer view of the enclave, the interior. So I'm sure Dave talked about this a couple of weeks ago, but there are really 3 neighborhoods. There are a group of 4 buildings here that create this neighborhood and this sort of courtyard space. Another 4 over here that create another courtyard, and then another 4 here. And they're all grouped around the open, the sort of village green area. And so what we're trying to do in each of these courtyards is there'll all be similar plants that are used there, but we're going to try to use them in different ways and emphasize different things so we can make each of those a little bit unique and identifiable. So a little more interesting and different, but they can also become familiar. So each of these is themed. You can see here wind and sound. So this courtyard over here, again, the plant materials will be largely the same as elsewhere, but we'll emphasize grasses and we'll incorporate devices like wind chimes or windmills. So it's on the wind theme, but it'll give it sort of a unique and hopefully identifiable feeling. Up here, this one we're talking about rock and water, so you can't really see it here, but we're going to develop a dry stream bed. And essentially that's just boulders and gravel interspersed with lots of different plants that have the effect of a stream flowing through. It won't all be water. There might be a water feature in it. In fact, it can actually be a bioretention element there because water can go into it. But it's really a different device, a different feature that will give that courtyard a different feeling. Around the rock and water theme. And then the last one down here, the theme is birds and butterflies. So again, we'll emphasize plant materials that attract butterflies, they're colorful. We'll have things like birdhouses and bird feeders. And so it also will have a different feeling. And then you can see here in the center, we have really a traditional village green with open lawn and shade trees around it. This little area, triangular space here is going to be a sensory garden, so it's a little bit more of a natural area that the residents can wander through. And then this is a pavilion where there's going to be an exercise space over at this end, and down here it's game tables. They're just outdoor activity spaces grouped around this indoor activity building. And these are just some images we developed to try to illustrate the different character of these spaces, but we're trying to make them outdoor spaces that are distinct, they're memorable, which is in some ways a wayfinding device, or they include wayfinding devices. As I said, there are going to be 67 trees planted in that whole interior area, but there doesn't appear on this plan, but in this area there are going to be many flowering shrubs, grasses, perennials, lots of different landscape, and that's what we tried to illustrate over here. So you see in the upper right what the birds and butterflies might look like. This is the way we envision that. And on the lower right, you can sort of see this dry stream bed along the side, giving it a different character. And so we actually are pretty happy with this landscape plan. We think it's a really nice landscape plan. We think it typically complies with certainly the spirit of your regulations. But there is one regulation that it does not comply with. You have a requirement that for any open space, we need to plant one tree for every 1,000 square feet and 2 shrubs. And I think on a smaller site, that's certainly a perfectly appropriate standard. It really means you plant a tree every 32 feet, more or less, which is a typical street tree planting, or that's the way, in fact, in the buffer, we're planting about that spacing, or a little less. So they grow to maturity.
I think I'd stop you. You're familiar with the PowerPoint that Dave referred to, and one of his graphs was showing what the site would look like if you attempted to comply with all the trees,
Right.
and it's fair to say it's impossible to do that.
Well, it would make, as I said in the bottom note down here, it would not make it any longer a pasture or meadow. It would be a woodland. I mean, it really means planting one tree every 32 feet over the whole property.
And in fact, on Dave's plan, with all the dots shown, didn't even include all the required trees if we were to attempt to comply with this. That's fair to say?
Yeah, that's right. So certainly that is a reasonable spacing. In fact, we've used that in the parking area, in the buffer, and even in the enclave itself, because that's a spacing that allows most shade trees to mature and have space to grow. They grow together eventually, but they don't crowd each other out. So it's a perfectly reasonable standard to ask people to comply with on open space.
So when you conceived of the landscape plan, did you take into consideration the fact that it has been a working farm, it has meadowlands, pasture land, and did you try to integrate the existing site into your landscape plan?
Yes, I mean, partly because of, I guess it was agricultural, but just also from a landscape perspective, they're all different, different landscapes that have different characters. There are woodlands, there are open meadows, there are river landscapes. So we didn't want to change that if we didn't have to. So that's why we developed the plan we did. But to comply with this regulation would make that difficult, unless we just cram them all together, but then they wouldn't survive anyway. So
They would die.
yeah, some would crowd out others for sure. So in any case, so just in conclusion, I mean, aesthetically, I said I think this is a really nice landscape plan. I think we are going to be able to preserve much of the pastoral character, certainly along the edges of Long Red Hill Road. But we are, by the way, putting in 229 new trees. So it's not like we're not introducing new landscaping, but we're trying to do it where we think it'll have a purpose and come to some effect.
And if I could stop you there, you've had dialogue in the past with Larry Carlson, who again testified last time, CEO, President of Methodist Communities, in terms of his interaction with the HOA and discussions about a desire on their part to enhance the plan.
Yes.
And did you take that into consideration when you prepared, especially along the northern edge, your planning scheme?
Yes.
And that's how it was submitted, is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's how we submitted it. Yes.
Okay. Sorry to divert you, I know. I knew you were going to go into...
Where am I? Should I start over again?
No.
Well, the village concept is certainly something that the architects have developed, and it's a wonderful and fairly new concept, but from a landscape perspective, it's been really exciting for us to be able to develop these different neighborhoods and try to create different environments that the residents can enjoy, but that they're distinctive. And we're going to be planting in that interior, not so much on the perimeter. We're putting trees and meadow grasses on the perimeter, but on the interior, we're planting lots of colorful new shrubs and perennials and grasses and things. And from a landscape perspective, I don't think there are negative impacts. I think we tried hard to create the buffer along that was one area that we focused on, but we wanted to do it in a natural way, not just an artificial way. So I think that, I mean, if you can see the little circles on the plan, that varies from 50 to maybe 70 feet. But when that grows in, and with the tree line that's already along the property line, there should be a mature wooded area that's probably 100 feet wide at that point. And we think that'll mature into quite a nice buffer. And we think we're improving the site.
Right, and so you've taken a look at the comments that were provided by Mr. Bucko and also Ms. Keller, is that correct?
Yes.
And you and I went over what was covered, and would you like to just summarize how you perceived you responded to their points in the landscaping?
Well, our drawings were submitted last week also, but we tried to address all of the comments in the engineer's report. There was one we didn't comply with, which only one. Everything else we tried to address in the best we could. There's one that requested foundation plantings, and those are, I think it refers, it refers to plantings around the foundation of buildings. We typically don't necessarily do that, but it refers to the level of detail that will be on the interior of the enclave. And like I've said a number of times, that's there's going to be a lot of plants in there. So typically that's a level of detail we don't really get to until the very end of the project. If someone moves a walkway, then we have to move all those plants around. So we haven't gotten to that level of detail.
So if the board were to provide the relief that's requested, would you have any problem in working with Mr. Bucko or another expert to make sure that the foundation plantings were comfortable for Mr. Bucko?
That was going to be one of my questions when we were done. So.
More than happy to stipulate to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah.
Any other, Mr. Bucko, did you have any other points that Jeff didn't?
No, he adequately addressed basically all the comments that I had in my September 13th letter. And, if he's willing to work with us, that's good. And we did discuss it briefly with your engineer at our Friday meeting. So
yes,
we have addressed this, we have looked at it, and with the testimony that they're willing to work with us on the other issues, that I'm satisfied at this point.
Kate, did you have any other comments? Well,
I think that testimony was just very thorough. The only thing I would just note for the board, just the board's understanding, is that this is kind of a unique waiver that they're requesting here, which is that it's really a waiver from a checklist item. So, that they've provided some positive and negative criteria, but it's a little bit different than a typical variance. So just, for the board's consideration when you're weighing the testimony.
so the property's different as well.
Right. It's really, it's kind of a blanket requirement that doesn't take into account other test properties.
Okay, board members have any questions about the testimony that's just been
I
given?
do. So, I'm not really satisfied with the buffer that's going to be between the residents. That's my primary concern here. If I lived behind this farm, I wouldn't want to see or hear your project ever again. So I'm concerned about what the buffer is going to be. And obviously, based on what you submitted, it's very difficult to get a visual of how things are going to fill in or how long they're going to take to fill in. But that would be my concern in giving you the waiver. Not that what you've asked for in some way doesn't make sense, that we're not putting a tree every 30 feet over the entire property, but that there's enough wooded trees being planted in the back to give the residents behind you without putting in a fence. And honestly, I don't know if that's something the residents would want or not want. I guess we'll have to wait and hear from the HOA's attorney when it's his turn. But if I lived there, that would be my concern. So as a member of this board, that is my concern as to what we're doing to protect those people so that they're not impacted by the development.
Well, let me go back to this again. This is the area we're talking about here. So you can see where the existing trees are, quite substantial in this corner, then this is sort of along the property line, and then down here in the residences are over here.
I saw it, but I'll be honest, I can't help them. I just can't.
No, I just want to explain what we did. I mean, anybody could come up with a number of trees to put in there, and someone else can come along and say, put in more trees, and you can keep doing that. What we did here was, and which we thought was the right landscape approach, was to try to create, to replicate what, not that I walked through here and identified all the trees, but the plants that we've used here, there are 9 different species, and they're species that you would typically find in a wooded area here. So what we tried to do is actually replicate what might occur there naturally. And in fact, if this is planted, a lot of, as long as it's left alone, a lot of volunteer plants, similar to the ones we planted, will probably come in and grow up. So this will grow, if you look at sort of this dimension from over here, here's the property line, and there's a line here that's, I think, 100 feet. That whole wooded area will be 100 feet deep. So we put in the 71 trees we came up with were simply because if you use the typical spacing for these species and do it in a natural way, not just line them up, that's what we came up with. So you can see the density of it, and those circles represent what they would be, I think, at 2/3 maturity.
Well, if it's 100 feet, you're doing it every 30 feet, you're talking 3 trees. Right?
No, the 100 feet is the width. 70 trees in there. This is...
So you're talking 100 feet width, not length, right? So if you're doing it every 30 feet?
From the adjacent property.
Yeah.
When this grows in, it'll be, this group of trees, this wooded area will have a depth of 100 feet.
Yes, I understand
The
that.
length is about, I don't know, 600 feet, something like that.
Right.
But the trees are planted in several layers. You can see there's some back here, then there's, so they're not neat rows, but there's several layers of trees. But within those plantings, they're typically 25 to 30 feet apart. Flowering trees and some of the evergreen trees are closer together, shade trees a little bit, but they average sort of 25 to 30 feet. Now, can you throw more trees into that space? You can, and in fact, some will probably come in naturally. But over time, the ones that are shaded out by the bigger trees will eventually die out.
And I do
So we try
understand.
to plant this the way we think it will evolve and grow in naturally.
And how long does that take?
Well, it'll take a little while, but within a couple of years, it should begin to fill in pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, if that's me, I'm not happy with that answer, that I live behind there. I'm not going to wait 20 years for your trees to fill in so that I don't have to see
It won't
your
take 20 years.
project. Well, I asked, how long?
I said a couple of years, they'll start to grow in, and these trees, when they're planted, are maybe 14 feet high, and the shade trees will grow a couple of feet a year, and they'll begin to fill in, so. can I
So
tell you
I'm
exactly
not
how
going to
long?
keep pushing you, I'm just telling you I'm not satisfied with your answer. If, in order for me to feel comfortable with this, I'd have to feel that that neighborhood is protected by the trees you're putting in. I can't tell anything from that diagram at all, nothing. Even this diagram, which I can't see that one, to be honest, can't tell. So I wouldn't be able to vote to give you the variance you're asking for to cut down on the trees because I don't feel the neighborhood's protected. So I feel that you're going to have to give me, I can't speak for any of the other board members, but I'm going to need more detail in order to be able to personally to vote in any way that would reduce the number of trees. Right now, I would vote no, because I'm not comfortable with what you've told me.
Right, Jeff, if I could follow up to see if you can clarify this. Are we planning to cut any trees in that northern, none at all? And presently, that's all pasture land, is that right?
Yes.
So every tree that's in there is going to enhance the existing landscaping, is that right?
Yeah.
Now, if the board wanted, we could put evergreens every 3 feet, 2 feet, whatever, so that would be solid. Is that right? Could. Why
They
wouldn't
wouldn't
you
last
want
very
to?
long, but,
And why is that?
well, because they would crowd each other out, and the shade trees would shade out the evergreens. So,
Right, and let's say they weren't crowded out, and why wouldn't you recommend basically an opaque landscaping there?
well, it wouldn't look natural.
And why do you
These are
want it
all-
to be natural?
Well, what we're trying to do is make this blend in with what's there. We're doing that with the pasture land, we're trying to maintain existing character, and with the wooded land, we're trying to match that as well. So that it all grows together, and over time, it looks like a natural landscape.
But if the board insisted that they wanted a opaque landscape of laurels, for example, or some other evergreen, pines, whatever, I mean, we could do that, right?
Yeah,
Would you like that?
no.
Well, I think you're missing the point here. And I'm going to piggyback on what Valerie said.
Sure.
We that live in this area, and I know you guys don't, have seen a field there with animals and pastures forever.
Yeah.
So now you're asking us for a variance, not only for the trees, but to build this facility. So you're asking the neighbors that a few trees there that may grow in 10 years, and what happens in the wintertime? Because I didn't even ask you what type of trees. Why would we allow a variance to change the whole look of that neighborhood and make it uncomfortable for them to come out into their yard and see a whole row of buildings there? Is unacceptable to me if I lived there. I would be out there right now, standing up and hollering. Number two, you're saying that we have too many trees if you follow the ordinance. I disagree with that. Again, I get off that Parkway exit 114, for years I see an open field. What am I going to see now? A few scattered trees and buildings from one end of the property to the other? I understand you want to leave open fields, but they're useless, because behind the open fields, we're going to see these buildings all lined up looking like a stockade from the outside. So to me, I think we need trees that in the wintertime, and I'm talking about in January, that I drive by and I don't even know that that building exists there if we're going to approve this for that property. Because that property is gone forever after you build it. And we're going to have to live with whatever we see there. And if we don't make it right, acceptable to begin with, we're all going to be unhappy looking at that every day when we get off that Parkway exit. So I understand all the ethics about making it look like it's natural and all that, but it's not natural anymore. You took that away. If we approve this, the natural is gone. We're never going to see a pasture there. Seeing a couple hundred feet all the way in one corner is useless.
So then my feeling as a resident and as a zoning board member, and I've been on this board for 25 years, is you have to make that less disturbing to the neighbors. And not only the ones behind it, but anybody else that lives in Holmdel and Middletown that has to pass by and look at that every day. And that's my feeling as a board member. I'm not sure what everybody else feels, but I want to see a heavier landscaping plan that will protect people's visual look all year round, not just in the summertime.
When I wanted to shield myself from my neighbor's pool, I put in an entire wall fence of arborvitaes. Do they look natural? I really don't care. I don't have to see my neighbor's pool and their fence. And if I'm the people who live behind this, I don't want to see you. I want you to have trees, so year-round, I don't have to see you. So I understand we have to balance that with the idea that the trees can't choke one another out or kill the landscaping. That's counterproductive. But as Dimitri said, it's less to me about the natural look of this and more about making sure that the community is seeing what they need to see. And for me personally, most importantly, it's the community that backs up to this. Less the street view and people coming off the parkway than the people whose home lives are going to be disturbed by this community. So
I certainly appreciate, on behalf of the owner applicant, the focus. So if the board would like to not follow the concept and would like to have a solid whatever, we will do that. But I think it's up to...
Well, I'm going to want to wait to hear from Mr. Gazarovski on behalf of the community and maybe some of the community members who are ultimately going to speak, because I really want to hear from them what they want. They're the ones who back up to it. So I'm not going to tell you what I want to see yet. I'm just letting you know that I can already tell you from the presentation I'm not satisfied with what you've presented to me. But what I want, I don't know the answer to yet.
Well, let me, a slightly different perspective. I personally prefer a natural landscape. Around here, I don't care for a row of arborvitae, because usually they're chewed by the deer to a height like this.
You could pick other species. You could pick other species of the...
Right, but question I have is, since you've emphasized the trees, and trees are part of that, with regard to the drawing that's up there, the shaded green area, is that already currently woodland?
Yes.
And there is some of it along the property line?
This here, yeah, here.
And so part of that area is already vegetated, and you're not proposing to take any of that down?
No.
In the added buffer area, which is currently pasture land, aside from the trees, are you proposing any shrubbery to provide an understory?
There are understory trees, and there are evergreen trees mixed in with the shade trees. We didn't put shrubs, mainly because the elevation goes up. So if we plant shrubs close to the property line at that lower elevation, they're not going to do anything in terms of the view as you look up the slope. So we concentrated on layers of shade trees at a higher level, understory trees at a lower level, and didn't bother putting in the shrubs.
I mean, it also depends, the shrubs are the first thing the deer eat also.
Yeah, I do think that if that's left alone once it's planted, that other things that can survive and thrive in that environment will come in. So I think a whole understory will grow in within a couple of years. And probably other trees similar to the ones we're planting here.
Now, there is a fence, I believe there is a fence along the property line?
It's a wire fence.
Yeah.
How tall is it?
It's just for animals.
5 feet maybe?
I have photos of it here if you'd like to see it, but
Yeah, it's more a question, does it
I've been
keep,
out there, I think it's 4 or 5 feet.
does it keep the deer, tend to keep the deer out?
No.
I would, yeah.
4 feet's not going to do anything.
No, okay.
Deers jump 6-foot fences.
They do a job on the understory.
Yeah, they do.
But there's a lot of species of plants you can put there, Norwegian spruces and blue spruces and other type of trees. I'm sure he knows that'll look nice. I'm not saying about lining them up with arborvitaes either. That would look terrible. But you can use evergreen trees that are natural mixture of different species that are deer resistant to camouflage that whole complex. That's my opinion. as a resident, as somebody who's going to look at it whenever I pass by. And I'm also very anxious to hear the neighbors because they're going to back up to it. And I would think that that screening has to go from one end of the property to the other end, and it has to be so they don't see it either. Because right now they have a beautiful view of an open field. And if we approve this variance to build this facility there, that's not what is supposed to be there that they saw all their lives. Now they have to look at something different. So we have to mitigate what that is to see. So like Valerie, I'm concerned with the rear, but I'm also concerned with all the other residents that are going to pass by that every day, getting on the parkway and getting off and seeing whatever that's going to look like on the outside.
The different question that I had related to that was the meadow areas.
You will.
There are extensive meadows, or call them meadows, fields, which these days, or for many years, occasionally you'll see a variety of animals on those fields of all sorts, goats, donkeys, and the like. Will there be such here, or what will maintain the meadows as meadows longer term?
Well, if you want it to be maintained as meadow, it could be mowed once or twice a summer. And, and that will maintain that look. I don't know whether there'll be animals out there or not also. But it can't be maintained as a meadow without the animals, is the answer.
Okay.
To possibly help out, could we talk a little bit about the size of the proposed housing buildings along the northern tier there? Are they single-story?
I believe so. No, I'm not the architect. So.
Well, I can as we heard last time, they are single-story along the northern tier. And are you familiar with the length from the nearest property to the closest building, or should we have our engineer talk about that?
Probably, yeah. I think from the line that's there, it's maybe 130 feet or something like that. I'm not sure.
And we'll have Mr. Simoff next time and clarify that. And there's it helps also talk about there's another buffer in there on the other side. But I can tell I should give that to the civil engineer.
I have a question too. I think I too agree with Dimitri about having protection, kind of a barrier towards the parkway as well, in addition to towards in the northern side. But my question is, can you plant trees that are bigger than 15 feet? Like, is it possible to put 30-feet trees right away, like mature trees? Is it possible?
Well, sure, it's possible.
So you don't have to wait a few years for them to mature, is that?
Yeah, you can plant them any size. As they get bigger, they actually don't do as well. It takes them longer to settle in. So planting them smaller, you can plant more of them. But they also will grow more quickly from where they are. But can you put a bigger one? Yeah, you can put a bigger one in.
Do you have a norm for the size of trees that you planted on these projects you've been working on?
It depends on what the purpose is, but these all comply with the basic regulations required here.
Can you give a little more clarity to the relationship of the deciduous and the evergreens along that northern border in terms of how many of each?
Maybe. I think out of the 70 trees, I think about 40 of them are shade trees. And I think 18 or 19 of them are understory trees, and 18 or 19, some number that adds up to 71, it's that proportion more or less, are evergreen trees. And so they're just mixed through that.
I have a question and comment. We were talking about that buffer, and I understand that you can't create something that the trees will crowd themselves out and eventually die, and then we've lost the purpose. But just looking at the diagram, I think the whole thing is, these people have been looking at pasture land, and it could go on, but all they'd see is pasture land. But when that pasture land ends, there's buildings there. And I'm suggesting that maybe we need more of a buffer of trees around the perimeter of the buildings so that if you can see through that buffer on top, you still can't see the trees I still can't see the buildings on the property because you have a sufficient amount of trees surrounding those buildings. I don't see that many the little dots going around that thing. Perhaps that's our answer. So whether you're coming off the parkway, whether you're in the backyard, you can't see those buildings because there is a line of trees around those buildings that doesn't make it easy to see. So that those people could possibly enjoy seeing some of that meadowland, but when they look past the meadowland, they see lines of trees. And I'm not so concerned about preserving the meadowland, about preserving the site of whether it's somebody coming off the highway or those people who have backyards. So maybe that's our answer, to add more trees there around the buildings than worrying about all the buffers.
And we did plant some to make up the mass. The closer they're planted, when they're planted further away from the viewer and close to the buildings, it takes many more. You understand? Because of the perspective, they'll be smaller up against those buildings. If the buffer's planted closer to the viewer, in other words, closer to the property line, you get much more effect when those grow in because it's right up close in terms of height and the spread of the trees. So what we tried to do was to create a pretty dense buffer along the northern edge, but then we included these groups of trees. I mean, frankly, when we've done projects, unless it's a cement plant or something, the goal for us is not to make the project invisible. It doesn't seem like that should be the requirement. These, I think, are going to be nice-looking buildings.
But it's...
I mean, you can think about what's there now. But so we try to break up the massing, not have just a solid wall. We put groups of trees in clusters around there, again, to make it look natural. And we put the buffer close to the property line because I think that's where it's going to do the most good and the most screening. But
I would say your word invisible, yes, make it invisible. The neighbor next door has a beautiful house. I really don't want to see it. I want my privacy,
Yeah, keep in mind, this use is not for this area. There's a different use, and if we were putting large homes there, which it's zoned for, we wouldn't have an issue. We would put some buffering, but people are okay with looking at one house. Here we're talking, and I hope you don't mind my terminology. To me, it looks like a stockade. Okay, it's all enclosed by walls or breezeway, however it is, and you're going to see that. And to me, if we're going to approve something like that, it has to be so the neighbors are satisfied with the view that they have if we grant this variance. If we didn't have a variance and it was just homes there, I'm sure we wouldn't have people objecting as much as they will probably object to this. And I too, just like Valerie said, am anxious to hear what the residents of Country Wood will have to say. But the residents that see it off the parkway are not going to all come to this meeting, so I'm speaking also on behalf of those people that are looking at the view going up Red Hill Road. So maybe a color of the building, and I didn't address it last time, should be different than this dark color that you've chosen, where it stands out more than anything else. And we need maybe a different color paint or siding to camouflage it a little bit more.
We certainly appreciate all the comments by the board members, and we're also happy to hear from the neighbors. Just historically speaking, the Methodist communities did attempt to reach out to the HOA. There was more than one meeting, and that resulted in this buffer. I'm not saying that the whole HOA necessarily saw the work product, but we did attempt to listen, and I think it would be fair to say that after last meeting, we offered to meet with the HOA, and then I found out yesterday that Mr. Gazarovski was on board, so now I know why we didn't have that meeting. But we're happy to interact with the neighbors and to do what the board thinks is proper, and of course we want to hear from the neighbors as well, so we're happy to work with them.
Well, do any other board members at this time have any questions of this witness?
I have have one question. Is it possible to do photorealistic 3D rendering so people can really understand what it is today and how it will evolve? Like you're showing on slide 6 for butterflies in this that you're planning. You could do it from the perspective of on the parkway looking northward, the entire facade.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. The more distant the view is, the less realistic and the less reliable it is. We can show the renderings we did of those little courtyards because it's very defined in the small plants and you can replicate those. But to replicate trees from a distance and numbers, it's hard to do.
If the board would like us to attempt to do that, we're happy to.
I think we should wait to hear from the public, and I want to see how they feel about this, so it's not just Valerie and I that are talking about it.
Bob or Kate, do you have any other questions at this time?
No, Mr. Chairman, I don't.
Okay, with the board's consent, will we ask for public comment on this witness? Okay, we'll open it up to public comment from questions, correct, on the testimony we've just heard.
I listened to the testimony of the architect as well as members of the board, and I'd like to make a comment which is also a question. I think if I were to question the architect, he would say that, I don't know whether or not he was aware of what the zoning is on this property at the present time. This property is zoned R40B. If we were to come up with a site plan, come up with a subdivision, you could probably build between 13 and 14 houses there. You have to be subtracting the land for the setbacks, the roads, and or the light. And I think we all admit that was how this property was intended to be utilized when the zone was created and when the subdivision next door was created. I think his plan is a good plan for a site plan, but not for a use variance. So if in fact this property were presently zoned for the use they're proposing, then perhaps his plan, which is a site plan, might be appropriate. Coming up the comment of my colleague on the board, because they're seeking a use variance, this is just not about the people who live next door. It's for the whole community.
This is not for a summary.
I'm not making a summation, I'm commenting upon.
We're asking for questions about the testimony that's been given.
You tend to do this, Mr. Gazarovski, before my boards, but I got to tell you, it's for questions right now.
I'll come back for questions after he revises the plan.
We can debate the law later on. I'm happy to do that. Thanks.
I'll have.
Okay. Are there any other members of the public that have questions about the testimony about the landscaping that we've just heard? Seeing none, we'll continue. Well, you want to?
Yeah, so just to be clear, Mr. Gazarovski, you represent the Association of all the owners. You indicated.
I just have a question on my own. He represents the...
Well, as a matter of procedure, when an attorney represents an association, then that attorney speaks on behalf of the residents.
So maybe he can ask it for you, but...
Let me ask some questions then, rather than giving a speech as my colleague has suggested. And I'm sorry, I didn't catch your last name. Roshi's.
Rich.
Thank you. When were you retained to prepare a landscaping plan for this project?
A year ago, maybe.
A year ago? Okay, now, when you first began the project, did you make the determination as what the existing zoning was concerning this property?
I did, no.
You did not?
I'm no landscape architect.
I understand that. But having said that, if I were to tell you now, the property is in fact zoned R40B, which provides for single-family housing, would that impact or affect the way in which you designed this plan?
Yeah, I'm going to object because he's only a landscape architect, and it's just not residential. School buildings are permitted, municipal buildings are permitted. The zone allows a host. So if we're just going to, he's not a planner. He was asked.
Let's stick to the landscaping, please.
Right. Am I closer to him? We can't hear it. Push it closer.
Yeah, to your
Oh,
witness.
sorry. Your witness.
Would you agree with me that if in fact this property were laid out for a 14-lot subdivision, the impact upon the adjoining properties would be less than it is for the plan that you proposed.
I'm going to object because there's no foundation to talk about whether or not...
That's conjectural.
Right.
So let's-
Answer if you want. I mean,
You can answer if you
wants to
want. If you don't
but
want to
otherwise,
answer, then let's go on. Next.
Am I supposed to answer?
Well, if your attorney allows you and said no.
I think the answer was it's conjectural, so I don't know.
Well,
why
let me
you
ask you this question. You've spoken repeatedly in your testimony about preserving some of the pastoral ambiances of this property. Will not that all be removed if this project were constructed there?
No.
It'll be preserved?
Some of it will. as
Well,
showed in the
I
diagram.
don't care about some of it, but you're obviously not going to preserve the entire area, are you?
Of course
Now, listening to the comment of the board member, are you familiar with what the standards are for a use variance?
I object to that.
I didn't, I asked, you said no, fine, I'll proceed.
Mr. Gazra, he's not the
I
planner.
have no further questions at this time, but I do want to, when this person comes back for further testimony, to examine him once again. Thank you.
Mr. Decker, just before you're done, do you want to maybe just consult your client to see if they ask you a question?
Yeah, if she has a question, I'll ask the question.
There were a couple of people out there that raised their hands.
It's inherently beneficial issue, which he's not bringing up.
It's really kind of a general question of the witness saying whether or not, if in fact now listening to the comments of the board members as well as my cross-examination, you could in fact come up with a planting scheme that would afford more protection with regard to the views of not only the properties which are immediately adjacent to it, but also those properties that would visualize the property driving past it, where it's presently pasture, and now will be what is referred to as a stockade. You could do that, couldn't you?
You can plant more plants, sure.
Yeah. Okay. So there are other solutions other than the ones that you've given to us.
And just to also answer your question, as we said before, we will consider the comments and we will digest them. And quite frankly, I wasn't necessarily planning to have Mr. Roach come back, but he'll be back, and we'll have dialogue with Mr. Bucko as well, and we'll see when we come back there.
Fair enough.
And I'll have dialogue with you too. Oh, maybe. Well, I'm offering to have dialogue.
We should go out to lunch together. I don't know if they'll survive it.
So, are we done with our friend here?
I have a question.
Oh, okay.
Question.
Questions?
Question.
Are you allowing the public to ask questions?
Yes.
Can I ask a question?
Are you in that Country Woods development?
My name is Eric Silvergold, 9 Powderhorn Court. I'm a member of the Country Woods Home Association.
In that case, you have to speak through Mr. Gazarovski.
No, I disagree. He
Well,
doesn't
that's
represent,
a legal
he doesn't represent me.
The rules indicate that if there is a representative on behalf of the association and you live in that area, that attorney speaks for you.
And your attorney got up and said he represents the association and all the whole.
Let me make a statement.
You can't make a... No.
Let me ask a question.
No, you can't.
You
can't.
So I would
Let's in front of the lawyers.
I would say that it really does depend on, this is a really loose HOA, right?
Yes.
This is not a real
I'm not sure what it is.
structured HOA, like you might have in a condominium complex or
That's
something
true.
like that. So I don't know that this HOA necessarily is going to fall under the purview of something like that in terms
Well,
of
listen,
that
this
the
board
HOA
can-
represents all the representatives.
This board can always agree to listen to the question. You can decide at some point what you give it, but
I'd like to hear the question too.
if Mr. Brown wants to put his objection on the record, he can, but we can listen to definitely the question.
I objected based on the standard criteria, but I certainly understand what the board wants.
Mr. Gazarovski was retained by the board.
Just state your name for the record.
I already did.
I need to hear it again, Max.
It's on the record. It's on the tapes.
I'm not challenging you. I just need to-
My name is Eric Silvergold, 9 Powderhorn Court, member of the Country Woods Home Association. Is that?
Well, you're not here on behalf
I'm
of the
not-
member of the HOA.
I'm a member.
You're here as a resident.
I'm here as a homeowner who is negatively affected by this project.
Remember, you're only talking about landscaping.
I'm here as a homeowner who is negatively affected by the landscaping and seek to ask a question.
Ask your question.
Mr. Roche, is that correct? Close enough, or is it correct?
It's Resh.
Resh, thank you. So how did you describe the current property when you started your testimony? Did you say, I can't remember the exact quote, but can you describe the property? Did you say it was a beautiful pastoral meadow?
I said it had that character, pasture meadow character, compared to a woodland or a garden.
Well, when you pave over that meadow and replace it with buildings, we want to make sure that the quality of life of the residents who are adjacent to you are not negatively affected. So
Question, please.
I'm stating, how many sentences am I allowed to use to create a question?
Question is usually one sentence.
Will the enclave structures be visible to residents of Country Woods?
I think probably not much more visible than the buildings that are there now.
You can't hear that. You gotta have the mic near him.
He's very soft-spoken.
Just gotta put the mic closer to him.
In my opinion, I don't think the new buildings will be much more visible than the buildings that are there now. When you stand there and look through, you see buildings there now. These are going to be different buildings, a different color perhaps.
Well, I didn't ask about, obviously I could see the buildings that are there now. So I'm asking, for the building that you're proposing, will it change the sight lines for Country Woods homeowners? So will from our perspective, will we be able to see the structures?
Yes.
Yes. Do you think that your landscaping buffer is adequate?
I do.
Do you think that you should be allowed to bypass the requirements of 2820C item 7? I'll address that to you.
Well, he's already testified to that, as did Mr. Holmdel.
So is the answer yes?
We are asking for a waiver. It's also goes a little too
About the number of trees.
So there was the zoning board talked about evergreen coverage. Clearly, we do not believe that the buffer, what your so-called northern buffer, is adequate to protect the sightlines of the Country Woods residents. So what would you propose to do to enhance that? We heard about higher tree levels, we heard about more trees. The evergreens, and the problem is in the winter, your current proposal, which keeps it natural, which the natural tree cover will disappear, do you think that cover is adequate to protect the neighbors, to give us the view that we you're taking away the view that we have. And I'm asking you how you can best preserve that, and we don't think that your current plan does that. Would you add?
Actually, a question, but I will ask Jeff to answer it.
I designed this in a way that I thought was appropriate for this site and for this project. The buildings are going to be there. They're going to be new buildings. They're going to look different. I think that, in my view, they're going to be attractive. I think I also
More
said...
attractive than the meadow?
More attractive than the buildings that are there, I think. But like I said, my approach to this is not to try to create a screen that's going to make everything invisible. I mean, basically, that's creating a wall along the property line. I don't think that's the right idea. So what I proposed was something that I thought would screen well enough that those buildings aren't going to be in imposition. Will you see glimpses of them? Probably, sure. To me, would that be offensive? I don't think it would be to me, but maybe it is to someone else. That's how I approached it.
Your question, Mr. Lateef, with respect to creating a 3D rendering to offer residents some perspective of what the visibility might actually be like, I'll second that question, and I'll ask you, can you create some kind of rendering so we can understand the impact of the potential sightlines?
You can create it, but for one thing, this is going to evolve over time, so at what point in time do you do it? But you're creating something that's in a perspective that you can't really... the way we do renderings like this, photorealistic, is take a photograph and put images into it. That's guesswork. There's nothing, there's no way to know exactly how big that tree is going to look up that slope at an elevation of 8 feet or something like that. You can make a judgment call.
So you have no access to 3D rendering tools, is that correct?
You have 3D rendering tools, but then you have to model the whole site.
Can you model the whole site?
I can't personally, but it can be done, yes.
So who would be able to do it if you can't, if you're incapable of doing it?
Engineers,
right?
people who are proficient in that kind of thing. It's not what I do.
Who would you recommend if you're not competent to do it?
I could research and make recommendations.
I asked the board to follow up on that a little bit more carefully.
I think that came from initially from my question, because I can't really visualize what we're looking at based on what you provided. So while I don't know what you're able to do for us, something more than what you've given us is I think going to be needed for the board to have an understanding. And I don't know, possibly, a time elapse type thing where you show us what it's going to look like at its inception and show us what it's going to look like in 5 years, so that we have a better understanding of what we're dealing with you having heard what all of our concerns are. Right? I think you get the idea the board, at least the majority of the board, has similar concerns about this.
And that is why I made the comment I did before, that we are listening to what you're saying.
Yeah,
and,
I heard you say that.
And we will go back, and in fact, my assistant is taking notes here. And,
Copious one.
yes, and we'll respond. I just don't know the clear answer to that as we speak, otherwise
I understand, and I understand you're not ready for it today, but I understand you get the gist of what our concerns and what the residents' concerns are. So I guess till they can come back with a different plan for us, so it's kind of right now, we're stuck right now.
Okay, understood. Am I able to make or ask a question relating to testimony that was open last week with respect to opening?
No, because that person is not here to address it.
I could address it.
We'll get it there'll be other opportunities.
Will there be
on
another
other subjects?
Will there be another opportunity for me?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And every witness that comes in, you'll have the public at large will have an opportunity to ask questions. And then at the end of everything, they'll have an opportunity to speak and give you a
I appreciate that, but I was told at the start of my comments that I was not allowed to speak as a member of Country Woods.
Oh, that's not what you mean by...
We solved that problem.
That solves?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
Nick Ponacorvo, 6 Country View Road. Have you had a chance to evaluate the site, the existing barrier that's there from both the site itself and from the Country Wood development? Has there been an assessment on how many trees are currently there and the health of those? Because when you're describing the buffer, there's reference to existing buffer and there's colors there, and I can tell you, since I live directly adjacent, I saw you at my house this weekend. And yes, I was doing the leaves, and as you can tell,
and your son did a great job.
Yes, Tyler. There's not a lot of trees there currently. There's not any kind of buffer. What's there is covered in vines. I do my best to cut the vines and try to save these trees, but if most of these trees are not very mature, there's some in the back. As you pointed out in that back, there's no debating the back corner, but I don't think anyone is even adjacent to that. Has there been an assessment done on what's there from both sides of the road? And, is there going to be a determination if some of those trees, we've already lost 3 or 4 in the 2 years I've lived there, or if they're going to die or they're covered in vines, is there going to be any plan to make sure that those are not going to, because they're being referenced as part of a buffer. It's not a buffer, you saw it.
Yeah, you go by Nick?
Yes.
Can I call you Nick?
Nick, sure.
Sandy?
Nicholas, if I'm in trouble.
Right. And your son's Nick?
Tyler, yes.
So anyway, Nick, what would you want? What would you want, I know where you live, I have photos, but I don't think we need to put them up. So as we're at the end of Country View, looking into the property, your house is on the right-hand side.
What lot number? Can you tell us the lot
30,
number?
I think. I mean, actually, yes, I have a copy of the survey from you.
I was curious so I can see on the map where your house is.
If you're staring at the dead end, I'm on the right. So my entire property, but, just butts up to it, or, is adjacent to it.
32.
It says, yeah, it would be.
Country View Road.
31.
There's probably 4 of them.
Correct.
Okay, so you're literally right behind it.
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, so I don't, obviously, as one of the members mentioned, I don't know a lot of specifics about what I want, but I do think that, the meadow, as has been mentioned, is really no longer relevant because that's not going to be there. So,
would you like to interact directly with Jeff here to talk about what you think would be?
I mean, I would like to give my opinion, sure. I mean, I recognize that other members have other, I'm not representing members, I'm just, I don't want to be the end-all be-all, but yes.
What I suggest, if you want to, if you can give me your number, we'll have him contact you. You can talk about your vision.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just my vision necessarily as much as I think what's being projected sounds like, an idealistic view of what you would expect to see happen if you were converting a farm. And I think the reason I led with the question was because last week I didn't, I got yelled at, but besides that was, I was going to do Jeopardy and give all my statements and questions, but besides that was I don't feel like the proposal is really from someone that's viewed both sides of it, just given some of the characterizations that have been given to the existing buffers.
Yeah, I'm not coercing you, but if you want to give you...
No, I mean, that's fine, that's fine, but...
I mean, I don't want to stop you from saying what else you want to say, but we're happy to talk to you.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that, again, I want there to, I think, in the form of a question, having a look at the site from both sides, not just from a drawing point of view, have you taken an assessment of what's there, and can you do that? Can you replace what's likely to not last very much longer?
Yeah.
If the board were going to give any kind of approval, not that we're a long way from that,
Yeah.
but we could make it part of the approval that the applicant is responsible for maintaining the trees,
and
replacing any trees that
Yeah,
die.
I think that would be
We could
fair.
talk about making a landscape easement instead of just open space, and then the town would have direct ability to control what happens in the landscape easement because it's dedicated to the township of Holmdel. So there's a lot of options that can be done that way once we figure out how that where it's going to be.
Yeah, that would be fair.
Perhaps also, Andy, that if you want to meet not just with the one gentleman, but Mr. Skorowski and/or any others, and to make sure you get all the relevant input about what's appropriate here.
Yeah, that's more than fine. And again, just to show you, our intent when we started this project was to meet with the HOA. We had, at least I was part of one Zoom meeting, I don't know if you were part of that or not. We had constant contact, from our point of view, with Allison, who's the president. We had dialogue up until recently. And it continues to be our intent to sit down. So that's why we have no qualms. We could have a meeting if that's desired. If Mr. Jazarowski wants to, key in on talking about landscaping, and you can talk.
Well, let me represent that I will in fact agree to meet with my colleague.
All right, good. My office is.
I mean, that was just my main point. I just think that, as long as it's evaluated fairly for what it is, what it's going to be, and not just renderings and drawings. The other thing is, I don't think on the Zoom meetings we really got to the level of detail that's being proposed. And again, I don't know that what's being represented is what's currently there. So that's all my questions.
Thank you. Son be part of the meeting.
If we can give them a four-wheeler and some children, so we'll do it.
Another suggestion, he actually borders the property, and Country Woods has a lot of homes that will even see that property. So I think you should make an effort that all those people that are within view of your property are included in this meeting that you want to propose.
Sure.
I know my two neighbors.
The folks within 200 feet, do you think that would be a logical?
I have to take a look at the...
Well, some of it is Middletown, et cetera, so It's the row of houses immediately behind.
Yeah, sure.
Because most of those lots are more than 200
That's
feet
certainly
deep.
your neighbor right across the street.
Yes, they asked, they're a little bit older, they couldn't make
Hardwood
it.
Court
They
and
recommended.
High Woods Court should be included.
Sure. Again, I'm just trying to get a perspective to make sure that we do what you like. We got the list, the standard list, within 200 feet along
That's probably just those first houses. They're suggesting.
So maybe you can walk to those few neighbors that are within view sight, even if they're across the street.
Yes.
And tell them about the meeting date so they can come on their own.
Oh, is that for the walkthrough this weekend, you mean, or
No, not
just the
this,
next
we're not
meeting?
talking about that with the attorney that he's mentioning he wants to have a meeting with you.
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
Mr. Brown, just because I've heard some comments, it might be easier if you just let Mr. Gazarovski know when you're going to meet, and they can let the association members know.
Okay.
And, why limit it to 2 or 3 people? Tell everybody so no one comes back next week saying they didn't have a chance.
Okay, that's fine.
You have to rent the VFW hall.
Yeah, that's fine.
I mean, with all due respect, I think that, the people that are closer,
That makes
it's not
sense.
that we should have opposing views, but there's certain issues that are important to the larger community that are maybe not, and there's certain issues like the granular details of this subject that are a little bit more important to people not South.
Yeah, I think that's fair, that if you're actually looking into the property like you are, you might have a different perspective than
Yes, I
someone
mean,
that
I've
might
seen
not even be
you,
able
I've
to see it.
seen your engineer, and I don't know if I've ever seen this gentleman there. He could have been there. I'm typically home all day at work. So, again, that's what I asked, so.
Sure.
Thank you.
When there are no more questions, I'd like to go back to a couple of the threshold issues that have been mentioned. There's also
Go
a
ahead.
question about the visit, and there's also, I'd like to answer a couple of your other.
Go ahead.
Finish the public. Finish the public.
Well, we'll finish the public first. Does
Yeah.
any other members of the public have questions about Mr. Roche, the landscape architect witness? Well, okay.
Hi, my name's Wayne Smith from 11 Powderhorn Court. One of my questions was, what about the family that's across the street from me on the corner on the top right side, where there's no landscaping, and they're having a view of all your construction. They actually just moved there within 6 months ago. They're starting a new family. They didn't know about this meeting. I was trying to get them here. But I think that they need to be taken into consideration with this project. And my other question, go ahead. Sorry.
They'll be invited. Sure.
And what are our alternatives to this project?
That's beyond the scope of.
And it's beyond the scope of this hearing.
Okay. Will there be another meeting for that?
No, I mean, this board is required by the state law, municipal land use law that governs us, to consider an application when it comes in, and that's what we are doing.
Okay.
So there's, it's not,
What alternative applications the site has. This applicant owns the property, this is their application, we have to decide on their application whether we're going to grant the variance they're asking for without regard for any other alternative.
All right, I'm just asking you to take my other neighbor into consideration, since they moved in here. If you look at, I'm sorry?
Do you not get the flavor from us that we're taking?
No, I do get the flavor, I'm just trying to make it, yeah,
We are, I want you to be.
yeah. Just trying to do the best I can. I've been here for 11 years, so.
no other hands from the public, then let's go on, Mr. Brown.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, in the beginning, you noted a couple of points that came up at the September 22nd meeting. I don't necessarily have a firm order, but you did ask about the cul-de-sac. With the Turnpike Authority, you had mentioned that a long time ago. There's a letter that's on file now from the Turnpike Authority dated October 4th, and there is no indication
That letter has been received and was distributed to the board members, so thank you for that.
And now, in terms of the name that you mentioned again, I am happy to tell you that we will change the name. The Memphis Homes has retained a marketing group, and they are in the process of looking at the appropriate name. And as soon as it's voted on by the board, you'll be the second people to know.
Thank you for.
Won't be the on-site. so we appreciate the comments on that. At the September meeting, we talked about a tentative date for the site. Mr. Bucko and and Hal Simoff talked about that, and I talked to Valerie about that. I'm sorry, Loretta, different board. But Loretta indicated that she can notify the folks in the town of Mentor if you still wish to proceed on Saturday.
Right, I have a note about that item as well, and question for Mr. Bucko and for you. One of the key items that we discussed in September is that to be useful, the site visit needs to be staked out.
It is staked out.
And, okay, and then last I knew, we didn't know that that had been done. And if there should be maps color-coded or however coded to match the
Color-coded
stakes.
and numbered by state.
So that, you know, if there's stake 29, you can tell what's what, and that copies of that should be made available, if possible, prior to the meeting, but for sure, copies should be available at the meeting.
And our surveyor was out there about a week later, and we do have a staking plan.
I'm waiting for the statement.
All right, will you have that staking plan available? You better.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I did send Mr. Simhoff the parameters that the board wanted to have at the site visit in an email. So he has.
I'm sorry,
Yeah, no, okay. Yeah, we just want to make sure that everything is ready, and so that if we do the visit on Saturday, that it's ready, and hence we can have an effective visit.
I apologize if I stepped away, but I wanted to make sure from our project engineer that he could comply. He hasn't been sworn in yet, but you're getting the staking plan, right?
Yeah, but should I testify?
You can testify, right?
Yes.
You swear to tell the whole truth, not about the truth, so
Yes, I do.
just
Your
state
name?
it.
Hal Simoff.
You're the project engineer,
I'm the
correct?
project engineer.
You're the president of Simoff Engineering, correct?
Yes.
You've been dealing with Mr. Bucko and including about the staking plan, correct?
Well, we talked about it.
Yeah.
What Bob asked for was more than what the board asked for. So at the last meeting, there was some notes that were taken, and they wanted the building corners located, but you're asking for the detention basins and some other material.
Yeah, the board members did want to see where all that was staked out,
I mean,
how it's going to look at.
We'll have to just do that in the field, because I have the corners of the buildings staked there.
And the roadways? The roadways in the back, are they staked out?
All that we staked out was the building corners.
That's not good.
Yeah, I mean,
Because that was what was asked for.
I mean, obviously, the year is marching on, and it's getting colder out. But would it be better to wait with the on-site till after the engineering testimony?
Well, that's certainly up to you. That's your discretion. We're ready to go out there. I think Mr. Simoff, based on his skills, could...
We can locate them in the field, but we can't stake them out. Because we know the orientation of the buildings to the basin and to the roads. So basically, the existing driveway is going to remain to...
I'm talking about the perimeter driveways that stop at a certain time. There were testimony that it could not make a loop because of the terrain.
Yeah.
I wanted to see what you mean by that. And if there's nothing marked out, how am I going to see it, and how am I going to know where the road is in relations to the Countrywood neighbors there?
What we can do is, based on the corners of the buildings, we can locate the basins just by measurement.
I don't think we're going to sit out there and wait for tape measures and calculations. We need to be staked.
Well, when we did this, we updated the survey on October 4th. And basically, I took the notes that were explained in the last hearing, and
I know that I said the road, so I don't know, who didn't write that down, but I said the road.
Yeah,
I think you need to sit down with Mr. Bucko and review this again.
Yeah.
We
All
can't
right,
have a
and we'll
meeting.
do that. And so Mr. Bucko
We'll talk later. Okay, we'll come back to talking about dates a little later.
All right, so Saturday's off.
Correct. I mean, one of the keys with regard to a site visit is we, as a board, need to formally tell Loretta that we're going to have a site visit, and hence she will provide the relevant legal notices, because a site visit is a meeting of the board, but it is not a public hearing. So it's an opportunity for board members, and it is an open public meeting, and public to attend and observe, but there is no questioning, no commenting, no discussion. It's simply a question for observing the site and seeing what's where and what's there. Any observations made on a formal site visit have to be brought back to the next hearing and presented. The hearing is in this room here under oath, and it gets recorded. You can't do that at the site visit. So, okay, at this point, it appears that not everything is marked out appropriately, nor have we in fact discussed any of the engineering, so we didn't get to talk about some of the site concerns yet. So let's defer the site visit until, say, after the next hearing, when we might begin to talk about engineering.
Ralph, is it possible that if they mark everything out on paper, that way before the hearing, the meeting on property, we get a copy of that, so we make sure that everything is marked that we need to see?
At least for sure get it to Bob, and Bob...
Get it to us.
Get it,
Bob,
yeah.
I'm sure you know that one of the concerns from certain board members is the access rate for emergency vehicles. So
Absolutely.
in particular, I know you have no guess where that might be. So in particular, they want to see where the roadways are going to be for the emergency vehicle access, the width of the roadways, to the extent you can kind of map that out for external to the project. So you heard, listen, it's not a surprise, right, Mr. Brown? You heard the questions on the last.
As a matter of fact, I've thought of our vice chair quite a bit, and we did have a Zoom meeting. It was with the fire marshal. It was just Simoff. It was our assistant project architect, that's Dave's assistant, and we actually redesigned for EMT access purposes.
You don't want to open this up right now.
No, I don't. I don't want to open it up.
It's not testimony. It's not
This is
testimony.
a list of all the stuff after I review the plan that we need to speak about.
Okay, very good. Well, we will continue to have dialogue. I think Mr. Simoff talked recently as Friday about that, and there's been more dialogue. Yeah, but we'll talk about that later.
What about the
I'm not
entrance?
going to give you your notes, that's how I do, but you just sit down there, Mr. Simoff.
Well, I will, actually, Mr. Bucko has these, and he...
That's a better check.
I give him
That's better.
permission for him to pass it on to you guys. But
And I will ask Mr. Simoff to contact Mr. Bucko tomorrow morning, or whenever Mr. Bucko would like, and we can continue the dialogue and...
But I would have liked to, at whatever time it's appropriate in the meeting today, or even the next one, to actually put it on the record and read them to you, and go over the reasons behind
Well, we
it.
Let's wait, when the engineer is sworn in.
Yeah, I know,
Yep.
that's, I said, at appropriate time.
Right. Okay,
Okay, so we'll release Jeff?
for this evening, yes.
Okay, he will be available. He does live in New York City, but I think we can drag him out of Manhattan.
Yes.
All right, my next witness for what would be planned to be a very short testimony is the CFO of United Methodist Communities. And I'll call him up at this time. This is Robert Peterson. Again, he has a title officially of VP Finance, but from layman's point of view, he is the CFO. Would you raise your right hand, please?
Just going to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes, I do.
State and spell your name, please.
It's Robert Peterson, Peterson.
All right, you go by Bob. You and I have known each other for a while. When did you start with Methodist Communities?
In September of 2019.
Very good. And as you heard the other witnesses now testify, would you give us the benefit of your professional background please, leading up to your present position?
Sure. I'm a certified public accountant. I have over 30 years of experience, primarily in the not-for-profit healthcare, senior living areas. I worked for about 15 years in public accounting, serving mostly not-for-profit healthcare and senior living and hospital clients. I then spent about 14 years in a not-for-profit health system, about half of that time as a hospital CFO. I did spend about a year and a half in a for-profit surgery center management company, and then for the last little over 2 years I've been with United Methodist Communities.
What are responsibilities these days for United Methodist Communities?
I mean, I oversee all of the finance activities, financial statements, you know, everything related to
Are you
finance.
familiar with the financial aspects of the proposed project?
Yes.
And have there been studies done, we call them pro formas?
Yes.
Could you describe what that is?
Yeah, pro forma is a, you know, an estimate or a projection of the financial feasibility or the financial results of a project.
And who's done that for United Methodist Communities?
We've worked with Baker Tilly, who's an accounting and consulting firm.
Where are they out of?
They're based out of Philadelphia, New Jersey. They're kind of, you know, nationwide. So.
And what's the purpose of UMC having this consultant?
So we use them really for two things. One, to do a demand study, which is just what it sounds, just to make sure there is demand for the product that we're planning to offer. And then secondly, to do the financial pro forma to make sure that the project is, you know, will support itself economically.
And before I ask them the next question, in terms of demand, Cindy Jakes has that, and it's also part of the document A1 that was submitted, has some graphs in it, and that deals with demands. But going back to the other component, which is what we're going to talk about now, could you provide the board with the benefit of the findings as you've relied on them?
Sure. So one of the things that we needed to look at when we were doing the feasibility study is what would we need from a lender? What would a lender want to see in order to be able to provide financing for us? And so what we did there was we reached out to an investment banker, Piper Sandler, who is based in Chicago, and they have a lot of experience in the senior living industry. And one of the things that they told us, one of the most significant areas that the lenders would look at is the debt service coverage ratio. And what that is that basically tells you how many times you'd be able to make your annual debt payments out of your operating cash flow. And Piper Sandler has told us that that most lenders would expect to see a debt service coverage ratio of at least 1.3 times. So in the pro forma that we have now that Baker Tilly has prepared for us, we're showing that in the first year of stabilized operations, you know, after we've kind of filled up the project, we're at about a 1.42. And that 1.42 is based on having approximately 95 residents in the community. So we'd need to get to about 95 residents in order to be at that 1.42, which is sort of about the minimum. Anything less than that, we wouldn't quite probably get to that 1.3 level that we'd need to get financing. So if we were to decrease the number of residents from the 105 that we have, because we're using 7 resident homes, that would take the project down to 98. And if we were at 98 and we needed 95 residents to essentially get to the level that we'd need to secure financing, we'd need to be at about a 97% occupancy level, which really isn't reasonable because there's always going to be some turnover and things like that. There's always going to be empty rooms when, you know, when people leave, and we don't fill them instantly. So the 90% level, which is what 95 residents would be on 105, is a lot more reasonable. So we've come to the conclusion, based on the feasibility studies that were done by, or the projections that were done by Baker Tilly, and in accordance with our conversations with Piper Sandler, that the appropriate size or the minimum size for this project is to have 105 residents.
Is that a minimum?
That's a minimum, yeah.
And the 1.3 ratio, based on your experience in the field for decades, is that an unusual ratio or standard ratio?
That's pretty standard.
And how do you know it's standard?
I've seen that before. We have similar ratios for the financings that we have with our current buildings now.
Can you give us a definition of the ratio you're using?
Yeah, it's a debt service coverage ratio.
I know
I'm
the
sorry.
term,
Yeah,
but what's
okay.
the nature?
So-
What's the ingredient of it?
He's a former banker.
Yeah, so what it represents is how many times you would pay your debt service, your debt payments in a year. So, for example, if your debt payments were $5 million, they'd want to see that your cash flow was 1.3 times that $5 million.
So you're using cash flow before what? Before
So-
CapEx and things like that?
Yeah, usually what the calculation is usually your net income plus depreciation and interest. That's
Okay.
the simple
Pre-tax
terms. Yeah.
cash flow, but you're
Right.
not paying tax.
Yeah, we're not for profit, so
Right.
we
Right.
tax falls out. Yeah.
United Methodist Communities is a New Jersey not-for-profit corporation, correct?
Correct.
Been around for decades, correct?
Correct.
There's a standalone corporation, which presently is called the Enclave at Holmdel, Inc., correct?
Correct.
In terms of the relationship financially between the mother organization and the Holmdel organization, what's the relationship and also what's the contributions that's necessary from this not-for-profit to even make this workable?
We're expecting to make a contribution of about $9 million.
How much, can you tell us how much leverage you're going to put on this?
Roughly about 20% or so.
Oh, okay.
A 20% contribution would be
Right.
ours. Yeah. So
Equity.
equity, yes.
Right, so 80%.
Yeah,
debt.
in that range.
Right.
We're still finalizing numbers and things, and but yes.
Is that typical in this industry to do that?
Yeah, usually that's not unusual. Yeah.
Now, Bob, at the last hearing, you heard, for one, Larry Carlson talk about the number of facilities. There are 4 comprehensive facilities, is that correct?
In United Methodist Communities?
In one-
Yes, correct. Yeah.
All of them have wards of dementia care,
Right. They all have a memory care.
but none of them are
unit.
standalone, correct?
Right. They're all part of a larger building.
And is the Methodist Home able to make payments for all those facilities?
Yes.
So what is the monthly cost then to somebody to be resident there?
In the current buildings or in the?
Yeah, I'm not talking about the Medicaid patients, I'm talking
Yeah.
about the private pay patients.
Are you talking about existing or projected?
No,
The projected for this project.
Projected, it's going to be somewhere in the range of, $10,000 to $12,000.
That's what I thought.
Is that a standard, unusual?
No, it's standard. I mean, we've done competitive market analysis to come up with what we expect it to be.
With that question in mind, I'd like to call your attention to
Is that a month or a year?
It's a month.
How much period of time is that $12,000?
That's a month.
A month, okay.
Wow.
But I would like to call everybody's attention to A1, it's the narrative. Attached to that narrative is Exhibit A, is the May 3, 2021 New Jersey DOH, what we call Certificate of Need. And in that certificate, is it fair to say that it talks about the mandate for Medicare beds?
Yes.
And what does that mean in terms of those who won't be paying the standard rate? How many folks?
10% of the total beds have to be Medicaid within 3 years.
Okay. You're basing your ability to pay, the ratio on 12,000 a month for somebody to pay. If somebody's in your facility and they run out of funds to pay, do you kick them out because now you won't be able to make your payments, or what happens?
Yes, I'm so happy you asked that. The United Methodist Homes is related to the United Methodist Church, correct?
Correct.
There are about 500 churches in New Jersey.
I'm not sure I can answer that, but yeah.
As a chancellor for all the churches in New Jersey for the United Methodist denomination, I can represent that there are approximately 500 churches. Is it fair to say that at least most of those churches provide monies on an annual basis to assist Methodist communities through a foundation that the Methodist communities has?
We get some money through the churches, and we also have a foundation, and we do provide, we call it benevolent care to residents, so we don't kick residents to the curb.
Okay, so if somebody was paying 12,000 and now they can't because they've lost the funds, those churches or that foundation would kick in the amount of money to help you stay solvent.
Yeah, or we do plan for that as well. We do plan that we expect that there's going to be a certain number of residents that will not be able to pay after a certain number of years, so.
And that'll be in the contract they sign with you?
Yes. Yeah.
And when submitted, it's controversial, we can have Mr. Carlson testify if you want, but as general counsel for a long time, United Methodist Communities has had a philosophy that no resident in these facilities are asked to leave if they run out of assets. A couple exceptions if people try to hide assets, but that's a completely different story. So it's part of the benevolent service. It's provided by this faith-based oriented not-for-profit.
Does that include meals as well, 12,000?
Yes, it's all their meals will be included, your housing, so it's an all-inclusive rate. We are considering having two different levels of rates. So in other words, if somebody has a much higher level of care that's needed, they might pay a higher rate than somebody who needs a lower level of care. So that way, somebody who doesn't need the same level of care wouldn't pay as high of a monthly fee. So.
Okay, well, all of this, I think, is background information from our point of view, but it's not really relevant to a decision on variances.
Right.
So, any board member questions about the testimony just given?
I had just one question regarding the...
This is typical pricing for a nursing home in the state of New Jersey.
Is it tied to this location, or is it more general that it would not matter whether you go 30 miles south, down, east, west, or something?
No, so the demand study that was done is based on this location, and it's about a 20-minute drive radius is the primary service area that they use. We do anticipate getting referrals and occupancy from outside of that area, but they use that as kind of the base, about a 20-minute drive radius as the base for the demand.
To amplify on that, again, that name that was mentioned before, our VP dealing with dementia in our system. Who's right behind me here, Cindy. She's specifically going to talk about demand, and she will make reference to the graphs that are part of the narrative. And I can tell you that the graphs from the narrative are part of the official state application, which resulted in the issuance of the certificate of need, which we'll talk about how. And she can paraphrase or refer you to the particulars in that to show you there's a direct relationship between the economic ability of this particular statewide system to successfully build this and sustain it based on demand information and also the economic analysis.
Okay, thank you. Kate or Bob, anything on this? No? Then just briefly, we'd like to move on. Any members of the public have any questions about this witness of the testimony just given? Seeing none, let's go ahead and move on.
All right, I have been mentioning this young lady before, and I'm happy to introduce Cynthia Jakes. Yeah. Yeah, well, she's not going to talk about the site plan, I'll get it for you, sure. I'll get it for you, but I don't have much about it.
You're supposed to tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
So just again, state and spell your name for the record.
I am Cynthia Jakes. Call me Cindy. Last name Jacqueus.
Okay. Cindy, you and I have known each other for a fair number of years, is that correct?
Yes.
We've been working together with the United Methodist Communities, and you've been there how many years?
Since 2000.
And what's your position now?
Vice President of Housing and Community Initiatives.
Does that involve dementia care?
It does.
Would you provide the board and therefore the members of the public with the benefit of your professional background, which leads you up to the position you have right now?
Sure. So I've been in elder care for over 30 years in many settings: long-term care, assisted living, dementia geriatric clinic, adult daycare. I have a master's degree, bachelor's degree. I'm a certified social worker and certified assisted living administrator, and I sit on professional committees on elder care.
And Could you provide us with the scope of your responsibilities now for the United Methodist School Communities?
So I oversee senior housing, home care, and at the corporate level, I get involved in all of the new community initiatives and projects, such as the Enclave.
And could you give us a little more detail about your involvement specifically with dementia care over the course of your career?
So, I mean, number one, as a social worker, and that's been my career, and in all of those settings, it's just natural that there's been dementia residents that I've attended to personally, assisted their families. In a geriatric clinic at Vanderbilt University Medical Center, I was involved with the Aricept studies, which was an early Alzheimer's drug. It's just been a big part of my career all the way through.
And you have knowledge of the Alzheimer's Association?
Oh, yes.
And how's that?
Well, I interact with them. I've interacted with them many times over the years as a social worker, as an administrator, and with the Enclave. We've spoken to them, in fact, very recently to be involved with us.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to offer Cindy, Ms. Jakes, as
Any questions about her credentials?
Specializing in dementia care.
No. Okay, go ahead. Thank you, we're accepted.
Okay. As we go through this, Cindy, of course, you were here when we had the video presented by the CEO who's behind this, Mr. Carlson, correct?
Yes.
So in the course of this, you can refer to that if you'd like. But why don't we just ask you to start, Cindy's prepared a statement, she'll admit that to you. I think she's going to paraphrase it.
Yeah, forgive me for reading through some of this, but I wanted to make sure I hit all of the points that would be of interest to you. Stop me at any time if there's a question. As you heard from Mr. Carlson, UMC has a history of compassionate care for seniors for over 100 years. And while we are faith-based, we are inclusive, and I wanted to give you a snapshot of our current demographic in our healthcare communities. Although we're Methodist, 41% of our residents are Catholic, 32% are Methodist, and this is a snapshot in time, and 27% are a mix of other. The Dementia Center of Excellence is a new concept, and as Mr. Carlson said, it's based on Hogeway, a groundbreaking model from the Netherlands. It was designed to look and feel like a small village, so that residents of Hogeway come and go from their homes to the outdoor gardens and amenities, but remain within a secure perimeter. Having been trained by the Hogeway leadership, UMC plans to bring this innovation to the U.S. So with 105 residents in small residential homes secured on the grounds of the former Potter Farm, the Enclave will be anchored by the town center, activity pavilion, a barn greenhouse area, and many of the spaces will be open, albeit controlled, to the outside community for events and activities as normal social interaction will be encouraged. A major focus in designing the Enclave was the assimilation of the existing natural beauty of the farm, which we have been talking about all night. And it was a really very important piece that we emphasized with our architects. So that would allow residents to stay connected to nature and the outdoors and the normal rhythms and cues of life, which is so often hampered in a traditional institutional setting. The Enclave at Holmdel received a certificate of need, as Sandy mentioned. The certificate of need permitted the construction of the project. It was received on May 3rd of 21. The issuance of the CO1 was based on the need for assisted living services in the area and supported by the rapid growth of the elderly population in New Jersey, and in particular within the primary service area. So there is a present and future need for this type of housing and care, as shown by these demographic studies. The Enclave will benefit the town in complying, as we said, with its affordable housing obligation, making available 10% of the beds for those who are eligible for Medicaid. A key factor in the determination of the area's retirement housing need is the age distribution of the population. In this primary market area, as Bob Peterson said, which is about a 15 or 20-minute drive from the property, the population in 2025 is projected to be 280,735. I know we've all heard the baby boomers generation is coming to retirement age and so on, but of that total population in this area, 59,000 or approximately 21% will be 65 years or older. 26,000, or approximately 9.3%, will be 75 years or older. Additionally, 2.6% will be 85 or older, and that's 7,100 people. According to the Alzheimer's Association facts and figures updated 2020, 32% of those 85 and older will have some form of dementia. But really the compelling story here is the uniqueness of this project and how it will focus on maintaining the normal rhythms of life, which are often disrupted with dementia. Dementia strips one not only of memory, but eventually of executive function, making decisions, and those decisions that are necessary to complete everyday tasks. And that is why maintaining the normal, familiar flow of life is so important and impressed upon here, and why we chose to build neighborhoods and to allow people to go out the front door in whatever weather to experience the outdoor and experience the nature and still feel like, it's a normal part of their life. A foundational part of the enclave is the neurocognitive clinic. The clinic will offer a multidisciplinary approach to address the complexities of cognitive impairment, offering a rich holistic assessment and plan of care. The resources of the clinic will be available to those from the greater community as well, who are seeking a diagnosis for their loved one and help with caregiving. Families will be provided with information, tools, and coaching to care for the loved ones who live at home. The Enclave will be a platform for research and collaboration with industry experts and a training site for, we hope, first responders, medical staff, caregivers, families, and more in dealing with people who have cognitive impairment. Right now, we are in discussions with some of the most committed professionals in this area, such as Robert Wood Johnson, Barnabas Meda Geriatric Clinic, the Alzheimer's Association, COPSA, Penn Medicine, Rowan's Institute for Successful Aging. We've reached out to all of these as potential collaborators on this project. So the Neurocognitive Clinic is being developed to be an industry leader and hub for innovation in support of those living with dementia, whether they live at the Enclave or at home. A key to the Enclave, which we referred to a couple of times in the last meeting as well, will be the community engagement focus. And residents will benefit from interacting with the greater community for further supporting normalcy. The Enclave is meant to be a resource and a place for the community to share talents and skills and to be mutually beneficial. Just like the Holmdel Theater I passed. We foresee artists in residence and the Holmdel Theater performing and having a space to do so and sharing their talents with the people who live here. A town center and activity pavilion located in the center of the campus will house a salon and club rooms, which will have spaces for programming of activities and fitness, exercise spaces, walking paths, and sensory areas, as we heard from Mr. Roush. Of course, safety is of utmost importance, and technology will play a crucial role. The secure perimeter will be monitored by a command center and security person who can deploy staff where needed. The entrance doors require a badge to enter and exit. There's 24/7 security and a camera system that will display each door. Residential houses will be equipped with motion sensors that alert security to resident movement after hours. The embedded philosophy is that everyone on staff, regardless of their specific role, is responsible for residents and residents' safety. Now getting to staffing, because I know that was a question as well. The assisted living regulations require one awake staff person and one other staff person at all times. The number of caregiving staff must be able to meet the acuity needs of residents in accordance with their assessment. If there's increased need, there has to be increased staff. The Enclave will surpass the regulation for staffing, as we do now in our memory support residences. There will be 2 staff people in each house, 15 households, plus floaters during the day, a director of nursing, 2 LPNs, housekeeping, dietary, life enrichment, social work, on and on and on. I've been working with older adults for my entire career. Every existing assisted living in this area that you know of, Chelsea, Sunrise, the rest of them, they're based on the same clinical model to a lesser or greater degree. The enclave cannot be compared to a floor or a wing of a building with locked doors and nurses' stations. Residents of the enclave will be able to come and go throughout the village with the freedom of a normal environment, knowing that they are also secure. UMC leadership over these couple of years has developed a specific program called Tapestries, which is based on staff relationships with residents and dementia acknowledged as an illness, meaning it doesn't define the entire person. Living in the most normal and least restrictive environment is the goal of Tapestries. That curriculum has been certified by the Alzheimer's Association so that we are now able to train other dementia professionals in the Tapestries model of care. In conclusion, when we think about what is meaningful in our lives, we think about freedom to make choices, to be comfortable in our environment, to have privacy in our homes, and to be loved and cared for. And that doesn't change with the impact of dementia. Keeping life normal, but with a safety net, is the aim of the Enclave. It is our plan that the Dementia Center of Excellence becomes a renowned resource in dementia care and services and a proud centerpiece for the Township of Holmdel.
Thank you, Cindy. As I did with Jeff, I'd like to turn to the comments to see if Cindy has answered them. As I gleaned through the Jerry report of September 13th, what I saw in there, Bob, under general comments D, under section 2, you predecessor company asked for testimony with regards to the facility's number of employees and hours of operation. So I don't know if we satisfied that for the benefit of you and members of the board. The other one I noted, which was 3, testimony should be provided if the public will have access to the site and common areas. And we suggested that's what Cindy attempted to. Did you have any other questions?
No.
All right, and then in terms of Ms. Keller's report, Ms. Keller, you indicated that we had received the certificate of need, so that's why Cindy alluded to that. I would like to take the opportunity to go to that quickly. Again, it's Exhibit A on A1, and I'd like to note just a couple of provisions here. I could ask Cindy the questions, but to be succinct, it kind of speaks for itself, but I think because of the relevancy with your permission, I'll just paraphrase it or go to it. So there's reference to the particular statute. It says that the issuance of a certificate of need is only provided where the action proposed in the application is necessary to provide the required health care in the area to be served, can be economically accomplished and maintained, will not have an adverse economic or financial impact on the delivery of health care services. And I would suggest that refers to part of Cindy's testimony, also Peterson's. On page 2, there's a special reference to the following. This facility, or the facility, will realize economies of scale from the operation of joint central services as it shares common ownership with other facilities in New Jersey. The department believes that this project can be economically accomplished and maintained as the applicant projects a positive net income by the end of the second year of operation. Cindy generally alluded to that, the work that particularly Mr. Peterson or Bob referred to that. And I don't know if we need to amplify it, but there are existing facilities that would have been examined, right?
So there are, in this market area, 314 specific memory support beds. 314. So while you see Chelsea's and Sunrises and so forth, they are assisted living, not necessarily secured memory support beds.
And United Methodist Communities has experience in dementia care in particular, is that correct?
Oh, yes.
We have 4 comprehensive facilities, CCRC and related licensure facilities.
Yes.
And have you and the homes received experience in dementia care, which led to you creating the program that you...
Absolutely.
Going back to page 2 of the seal, I call it the seal and certificate of need, United Methodist Communities, along with their subsidiary operating company, the Enclave at Holmdel Inc., have, along with their subsidiary operating company, have demonstrated a track record of substantial compliance with the department's licensing standards. He's familiar with that as part of the application. There were financial figures and also need figures.
That's right.
And did you refer to the need figures that are incorporated in the application?
Yes.
And is it true that the narrative actually has copies of 4 tables?
Yes.
That were part of the application, which led to the certificate of need being issued?
Correct.
Calling your attention, and lastly, at page 3 of that document, it refers to regulations and statute. I won't bore you with that. A new facility that is licensed to operate as an assisted living residence or comprehensive personal care home shall have a Medicaid occupancy level of 10%. Within 3 years of licensure, the 10% occupancy level shall be met through conversion of residents who enter the facility as private pay persons and subsequently becoming eligible for Medicaid, or through the direct admission of Medicaid eligible persons. Is that what you meant?
Yes.
When you testified? Right. And also, I'm sure that that's what Mr. Peterson, Bob Peterson, was referring to, at least in part, based on the issuance of the certificate of need. I have no further questions. And Ms. Keller, did I address the points that you were raising?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a couple comments. First of all, thank you for that. I think, as the chairman mentioned earlier, a lot of these financial figures are kind of out of the scope of this board, so it's more about providing context. When my comment, which is on page 5, number 6 of my report, when we're looking for testimony on, the nature of the use, which obviously you have given testimony on, but in terms of employees and shifts, etc., that's mostly related to, the intensity of the use. That's what we're questioning. It's obviously the Department of Health. The certificate of need is under their purview, and they have given that. But so what we're looking for, or what I'm looking for here from a planning perspective, is when you talk about the number of the required number of employees, but what will that actually look like? Like, how many people will be on the site at any given time? Will they be coming and going all hours of the night? And just really, what the actual operations on the site will look like from a planning perspective.
So on a typical day, there are between 60 and 65 employees. So there will also be a clinic. So on certain days, there'll be people who attend clinic. So there may be a physician or a nurse practitioner in addition to those 65 daily. Now there are different shifts. So there's the morning, afternoon, evening, and so some shifts will overlap. Some people start at 7 a.m., some people start at 10 a.m. So it's not as though there are 100 people.
Is that number the total number, or combining all shifts, or per shift?
So I'm suggesting that in a typical day shift, when we're at the height of staff, it's about 65 staff people.
So what's the total number of employees then?
Well, it's not the total number of employees.
Right, that's a different number because of shifts.
Yes.
Right.
So that's the peak number that you anticipate being on the site, and that incorporates people whose shifts might be from 7 to 5, and others
it's
who
a
might
typical
be from 10
day.
to 8 or something.
Yes.
Got it.
If I could maybe help folks out, those of you might have saw Mr. Simoff sneaking up here. He just provided me with a document that was generated by you. This is in fact. Well, why don't you describe it, please, and then we'll have more.
It's the staffing pattern.
Yes, that was included. It was a little hard to decode without having the overall context, which is why I'm asking for the testimony.
And would you like to have this separately marked? It's part of the traffic study, I believe, but we should probably have it marked separately. We're up to 86 now.
Sure.
Yeah. Do you want to refer to this anymore? Can we have her refer to it right now, and then I'll hand it to you? Thanks.
What number are we at?
A6.
A6. So, Ms. Keller,
Yeah.
any more questions with regards to shift changes or anything at all?
Not with shift changes, but also in my comment, I do address visitors, and I know it's impossible, testimony was given on this, you can't really predict how many visitors you'll get, but are the hours of visiting generally limited to a certain time? What do your typical patterns look like?
People can visit, if they're family, they can visit anytime. It doesn't generally happen too much after dinner, but they're free to visit.
Okay. I have nothing further for this witness.
There was mention at the beginning discussion about a restaurant. And I'm not sure we got an answer to whether that was open to the public or not, or is it just for the use of the people that live there as well as their families when they visit?
It's a bistro, and it's meant to be for the people who live there and their families and visitors, but also if the community comes in for, say, a performance, the bistro may be open at that time as well.
But it's not planned to be a retail facility?
No.
Right, that's what I wanted. No signage or anything like that?
Right, correct.
If I could just make a comment, if it's helpful. It's certainly not today, unless you want to hear traffic study, but one of the reasons why Mr. Simoff had that document is that he did include that, I can tell you, in his traffic impact statement. You also hear him testify with regards to the parking lot and why it's specifically that size, and it's fair to say that he will refer what Cindy's been talking to in relationship to the way he developed the parking lot and analyzed the traffic.
Let me just point out, everybody is certainly aware the clock's been marching.
Yes.
Just take a few more minutes for tonight.
Yes.
And we probably aren't going to complete with you to now, because we do have do have one other agenda item which won't take long, and we also need to talk about schedules and things like that beyond tonight.
All right, well,
So-
we are complete in terms of...
Okay, I know there are, I
said.
do have some additional questions on the operations. I don't know who else does, but just to understand a little bit better how things work. Fortunately, not having had a close experience with a relative who has dementia, but we've had a little bit of hearsay from other people about what may or may not happen, and I don't want to infer incorrectly how you folks operate. But let's take one house, which has 7 patients, guests, or however you want to call it, that you want to try to operate in as family and open. And what, through the course of the day, is the staffing level that one group of people will see, and how does that operate? And then I'll take it one step further. Who does the cooking? How is meal preparation handled?
So each household of 7 has 2 people in the household, a certified medication aide who is an aide who takes physical care but also can do some of the medication, and also a household coordinator. So that person who does the cooking will make breakfast, will help residents, and so those 2 are the primary ones in that household. There are 2 other floating aides who are out there to help if there's somebody with a more intense need. There's also an RN. There are also 2 LPNs, nurses. So in the household itself, there are 2 aides. And then the support people are available for whenever they're needed.
Where are they on a regular basis?
They're making rounds. There's also social work. So if there's someone with a particular problem, behavior issues, there's a social worker on staff full-time that can come to any of the households.
So the meal preparation is handled primarily by this staff person?
That's right.
But if they are capable and wish to, can some of the residents help?
Oh, and we encourage, and yes, we encourage that.
But would they be necessarily able to go to the store and take what they want and then cook whenever they want?
So an aide would accompany that person if they weren't able to go by themselves, and go to the store that's there in the enclave and choose the items that they want for the pantry or for their dinner. And as a household, just like you and I have, they would prepare the meal, sit together, and be as much a family type situation as possible.
And why is it set up so that a resident can go out in the courtyard and go over to a store. Why don't you just have that food provided in the house?
And delivered, right? Yeah, because it's not normal. And we're just breaking down the institutional barriers and trying to cue people as to the normal rhythms of life. You know, there's this thing called sundowning, which we've all probably heard about. And what happens at
Could you
3...
describe that just in case?
So sundowning is a phenomenon where many people with dementia seem to have problems, behavior issues, anxiety, around 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the afternoon when the sun is coming down, and that's why it was named that. And that's a natural part of the day where for moms, their kids are coming home from school, or they're waiting for somebody to come home from work. So it's a very anxious time of day, and it happens to our dementia clients. And so we try to do something about anticipating that and giving them projects and things to do, and actually help us get ready for dinner. The sun's going down, it's dinner time. Come into the kitchen, help prepare dinner, and what it does is it quells that behavior before it even starts. So we've been studying this for years, and we are doing our best to give them a quality of life that, you know, you can't always get in a locked wing where it's willy-nilly.
And of course, we've heard before, including from Dave Hogan, about the activities building. How does that relate to the philosophy of care and living?
So just like you and I have interests outside of our work, we have a theater club, or we go to a chess club, or like art or whatever, this activity pavilion will have those types of activity clubs, so that based on the past interest of that resident, based on their assessment and their family's assessment of their life, we could introduce them to playing chess again, or playing the cello, or whatever it is that was of interest to them. So that's what the activity pavilion will consist of.
Is it an individualized look at the resident, or
This whole thing is an individualized look at the resident.
is that any different from standard dementia?
Well, I mean, you know, having worked in it for many, many, many years, in an institution, you have to do things sometimes that are just easier for the staff, and it's not going to be individualized.
Based on, for example, COVID standards, is there a benefit for having 7 folks in a home rather than being in a large ward?
Well, I mean, I know you've all heard the stories, and it's been very traumatic these last 18 months, and you know, to have 7 people versus 28 altogether would have been much easier to handle COVID.
Can you just give some other examples? Not too many, getting late, but why 7 is better than 28 or some other figures?
Well, 7 just seems to work. It works really well with having the 2 staff people. It's just the right number to handle. It's not too small where, you know, it's one-on-one care, but it's more oriented towards the family size, you know, and the large family kitchen table, and it just works out well.
I know I hit you with that out of the blue, but
yeah.
I know you'd have a good answer. It is getting late, so...
I think let's continue next time.
Sure. Okay.
And I know I have 1 or 2 more questions, and I think your testimony and discussion, at least for me, is giving me a better feel for how this operates and what you're trying to bring to Holmdel. Anyway.
And you will be here on November 3rd, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, that's exactly the point. We will continue this hearing without further notice to the public to our next meeting on Wednesday, November 3rd at 7 p.m. What?
Sure. I'm more than happy to give you an extension each time we're here, and sure, I'll give it to you.
Yeah.
I'll send that to you. Oh, my second assistant reminds me, I'll send that tomorrow. Yeah, okay, thanks.
Okay, and then confirming that we're not doing a site visit this Saturday. Potentially on November 3rd, we'll get to some of the engineering testimony. And at that point, then we can finalize scheduling a site visit. So I'm going to pencil on my calendar only to hold it, not that it's a commitment, Saturday, November 6th, which is the Saturday following the 3rd.
That'd be fine. Thank you. And I realize it's tentative. I do understand, in speaking to Loretta the other day, you do have one other matter on.
Oh, for the
Still-
third, yes,
you know, the swimming pool.
backyard.
Okay,
So there's-
so we'll do that first? And then if the site visit is after the 3rd, we will have to continue to another Wednesday evening meeting because anything at the site visit observed has to be brought back to this room and made a part of the official record that people observed.
November 17th is
The tentative.
Loretta?
No, that's an actual meeting.
Yeah, that's a meeting night, right. That's what I say.
Yeah.
So your meeting after that's December
What?
1st, I don't know if you would plan to meet.
That, the 17th is the week of the league meeting,
Yeah.
which is in person, I believe, in Atlantic City this year.
It is, and I won't be here.
It starts on the 17th.
I'll be down there.
So,
But can I say something about the site visit? I was hoping, I know you talked about four corners of the building and now the road. I was actually expecting a lot more. I thought the entrance and where the buildings would be and all those would be marked. Is that too much to expect or?
That's what Bob's going to be working
Right.
out
Okay.
with the applicant.
then, well, Loretta, can we move the backyard from the 3rd to the 17th? No?
I need Bob to do that one.
Oh, okay. All right. So, so just to reiterate, we're ending tonight's hearing. It's carried without further notice to the public to Wednesday evening, November 3rd. We're not doing a site visit this Saturday. We may on November 6th, but that's to be determined how far we get on November 3rd. Any questions?
What about taking a stroll home and see if anybody of our board members are available for that date?
For which date?
The 6th.
Okay, for the Saturday, November 6th, is that okay with people?
No way.
Was that a yes or no?
I should be all right.
You're not?
I'm away for sure.
So, well, most people are okay. Yeah, well, we could potentially have to do it on your own then.
Well,
Based
you
on
have
the-
it until December 1st, so you could do it
Right,
the week after.
right, well, okay.
We should decide that later. Let's not decide
I'm
that.
pretty sure.
We don't have to
I
decide
know
that
the
now.
7th.
Yeah, we don't have to decide that now. Okay, that concludes the hearing about what's currently called the enclave for this evening. We're going on to the next item on our agenda. People, please. Sir, folks, please take your seats and quiet. We have another item on the agenda yet. Okay, item 3. Just take a few minutes. Mr. Brown?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Jerry.
Item number 3 is Holmdel Adult Daycare Center, LLC, Coles Plaza, Block 59, Lot 8, in the Route 35 Highway Overlay Zone, Zoning Board Variance number 451. Applicant granted a use variance to permit an adult daycare facility in Coles Plaza, 2145 Route 35. The zone permits a child care center, but is silent on adult daycare centers, thus making it a non-conforming use. The intent of the use is to provide a safe environment for senior citizens to spend portions of their day in a congenial atmosphere.
We've received a draft resolution. The board approved this last month, and from Marty. Does anyone have any questions or corrections, changes to the resolution?
I do. I made the same comment, I sent the email out, that I think that we should have a curb cut in front of the building. I know we talked about leaving it up to the applicant and to the
Engineer.
no, to the town, whoever runs the town square, but I was thinking of it as a safety situation. We pull up with an ambulance to go in there. We need a ramp to pull the stretcher up so we don't have to go on top of a curb and make it a lot
Is that
easier.
ADA part of the construction code?
Yeah, oh, wait, let's, let's defer to Kate, but there was testimony by Kate that if the site complies, they don't need to
So,
individually.
I do. So there are existing curb cuts on this property. It's just not, I don't remember offhand. It's
So
not.
I think it was like 30 feet, if I'm not
Yes,
mistaken.
Yes, so it was, I can't speak to when, the ADA standards when this was built, but I think our determination was that we would defer it to the construction official if necessary.
The reason why I'm bringing it up, as a first responder, and we're gonna probably go there one time or another, we have a stretcher, so if there's a ramp there, that we can roll the stretcher and get to that facility right in front,
Right.
it would make our life easy. Going 30 feet down, if we have to get back to the ambulance, we have to go back and forth to get other equipment. So having a curb ramp right in front of the retail location would make it easier for us to go up and down. So it's not ADA, it has nothing to do with ADA, it has nothing to do with standards. It's something that I would see would help.
The other thing,
first
and obviously the board could do it at once, but obviously Mr. Gale's not here, but he did testify that the applicant, the owner would not allow any site changes too. Now, I'm not saying that they couldn't do it on their own, but he did say that the owner would
We
not
didn't
allow it.
agree to it.
Well, we didn't agree to it at the time.
Yeah. It's, it's.
In theory, you could reopen it.
Yeah, they would have to come back
Yeah,
here
and have to give them a chance.
Do you think I have a valid point what I'm saying?
It's your area of expertise.
Well, it's common sense. Why would you have a ramp in front of a location that's going to require?
The only thing I would say is, again, they're not building the site, they're just
Yes.
occupying
I
the
got
unit.
it.
Yeah.
And we didn't agree to require.
That's right.
No, exactly opposite, right? Ralph?
It was the opposite.
All right, fine.
They put in the testimony, right, you're refreshing my recollection, the testimony was that the owner wouldn't allow it. So if we were gonna require it, they likely want to build it.
Yeah, but although it gets, there's a second level to that, I don't know what ADA and construction code says.
Right, well,
Because if the construction code and ADA says you have to do it, then the owner will have to comply.
it would have had to, we would have had to get not only the applicant's consent, but also the owner. I mean, the owner had consent over the application as a whole,
Right.
but it wasn't a site, it wasn't technically a site plan application.
I've never visited it to see.
So I think,
That was my
so I think the resolution is
I know it
drafted,
did come up.
right, the resolution is drafted correctly reflects what we agreed to.
I didn't say most.
Yeah. Yeah.
It would be really fun if we could just change everything in the applicant was done.
Then you sent it off.
Yeah.
It's a positive.
If I missed something, we can clearly clarify that,
No,
but.
you didn't, this
yeah,
definitely
right.
came up, and I think that it came up at that point when you raised it.
I should have raised it a
And
little
then
bit
we
more.
let it go.
And let it go.
Yeah.
Not like you.
So anyway, is there a motion to approve the resolution?
Yes.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Roll call, please.
Ms. Dabra?
Yes.
Mr. Buckalino?
Yes.
Mr. Hearn?
Yes.
Mr. Raffetopoulos?
Yes.
Mr. Blumenthal?
Yes.
And Ms. Fuller?
Yes. Perhaps instead of just an electric stretcher, you could just automate it. So you don't have to push it. In addition to the fact that-
Operate like a drone and go up and down and...
Right? I can't pull up right now, if you pull up wherever the handicap spots are, is where the ramp are, it's pretty close.
I don't know. I didn't see.
I can't pull
Okay.
up.
Well, is there any other business for this evening?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so 2 weeks to November the 3rd.
Wow. Oh, wow.
So these are.
These meetings are.
Yes.
Boom.
Wait, no, these are the new ones. Oh, these ones I got tonight. These are the new
Yes,
ones.
okay.
A1 is this packet they put together, like their statement
The
of
ordinance in fact,
narrative, and it included demands, and it also had a certificate of need attached to it. So that would have been, I think, think it would have been distributed. But so, and then another thing that they were mentioning, I'm not sure exactly which exhibit it was, they were referring to the PowerPoint presentation in general, so that would have been too. But everything is either been presented or.
Even the lot, you write an ordinance, you can see everything. And for this property,
I know, look at me.
but,
Amazing about it's amazing.
we want to be about the tree business. There was extensive litigation.
I'm going to schedule a lunch with you for understanding.
Anytime you want.
Yes.
You can just call me.
I'm going to ask you a question.
Come on, it'd be great.
This is like a setup of working other than I'm used to.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm used to brainstorming, talking to the team, and
Talking to the team, unfortunately, has to be on the record. And sometimes that's hard, especially when you're sitting down there.
We're like a judge with 7 people acting as
Yeah, we are like a judge. I mean, it's not as stringent, but
yeah,
that's why you're able to listen to that guy that you wanted to, whatever weight you give him at the end. It's up to you.
different paradigm, right? Once you say you're a judge and jury, then like here in the jury cannot enter the.
That's right. That's right. So you shouldn't be going out to the site and going to the paper saying,
and it's not just the MOUL, but the MOUL's been around for 70 years, and there's been lots of cases where people have gone to court, and there's been decisions made.
That's the biggest thing. If we, no matter this, it might be an appeal no matter what we do here. And if one of the things they cite is you're having a conversation with somebody in the country woods and they heard about it, and that tainted the application, to throw the whole thing out.
So, I mean, I'm seeing the orders, like you're seeing the variances and all those, and then you're going to discussing the benefits of that.
Correct, and it's a use variance,
Their
so,
last witness will probably be their planner.
that's right.
Who goes through all of the legal statements.
And you were here for the New Horizon, right? So at the end, they did their planner. And for a use variance, the plan and testimony is first. You got to show the special reasons, or if it's inherently beneficial, like they're going to say this is inherently beneficial, they might, right? So then that is a special reason. Now it's the negative, they have to weigh the negative criteria. And it's a big discussion.
Counterintuitive to me, but I thought indirectly beneficial in this case, if it is, we're on the rest, otherwise.
Yeah, the problem is they have to present all their testimony for us to decide whether it is. And they haven't even got the engineering testimony, let alone the planning testimony. It's just all the background testimony. We can't even, we're 2 days in already. So it's this could be another 2 or 3 days.
The whole thing and then discuss.
Correct. Now, you can ask the questions at any time during the hearings, if you have a question on this, and if it's not related, somebody will say, oh, that's the engineer, let's wait till we get to him, and then, okay. And so that's kind of how it's handled, but any question you think of, you can stop in the middle of the testimony and ask the question. As a board, we have the right, and if it's not really related, Ralph or I may say, well, maybe that's more engineering, wait till later, or he may say, or they may try to answer it, but they'll say, we'll give you a better answer later. But that way you don't lose your train of thought of getting the question out. But yeah, no, listen, anytime you want. I'd love to go out with you.
Basic question. Is there any preliminary reason for the application even concept? Like, can anybody just apply to anything? Or is there something basic where the thing is not even...
They can apply for the most ridiculous thing. The law gives, right, the law gives the town the right to say that's only housing, let's say. But it also gives anybody else that's either a contract purchaser or the owner to say, well, I want it to be this, and that's where their testimony comes in. Mainly for a use variance, the planner. Have they met the special reasons, and then the negative criteria. And they have to put that on the record. These guys will give us background if they think they're right or not. We will ask questions. We don't have to, we can find them credible and still not accept their answer. And just say, nah, we don't think it meets the, as Valerie said, and just use an example. The landscape is so important to me, I can't give you the variance just for the waiver for the landscape, for the trees. Forget the use variance. So I'm going to deny the whole thing. So, I mean, you can get into all that stuff.
I personally, I remember the history of Gazarovski. Like, this is not his courtroom. He doesn't get to decide. He's not going to have a whole trial, in my opinion, and call every witness to cross-examine. It should be told how this involved. I understand it wasn't.
Yeah,
I understand we have to give him deference.
Yes, we do.
I got the case law, I get it. But going forward, he had the opportunity.
He should be prepared. He should be prepared.
To cross-examine the witnesses as they're called. We should make it clear to him, he's not going to recall those witnesses at the end of this
Yeah,
hearing.
no, and you can say no anyway, and you can just say, no, we're not
Well, I
allowed
think you
to.
should let him know, we're not going to do it.
But in fairness, he had nothing to do.
I get it, he just started.
And the other fairness is,
You can have all the-
he really is gonna go, it's the engineers and the planners, which we haven't elected yet.
Well, he's already had said though that he wanted to recall the witnesses.